This corner of Oregon, in the 1870s, was not a place for the soft. It was a land of sharp edges. The wind itself seemed to carry grit, a fine, red powder that coated everything. It settled in the lines on a man's face and in the hem of a woman's dress. It made the whiskey taste of earth and the water taste of rust. The world here was a triangle of hard choices, wedged between the rigid, blue-coated discipline of Fort Klamath and the desperate, dusty ambition of Jacksonville. Jacksonville was a town born of a fever, a gold fever that had long since broken, leaving behind a lingering ache. It was all false fronts and unpainted back alleys, a place where a man's worth was measured in the weight of his coin purse and a woman's was measured by the man who claimed her. And just beyond, looming in the east, was the land the settlers tried to ignore. The lava beds. They were a black volcanic scar, a place where the earth had torn itself open and bled stone. It was a jagged, cruel landscape, a place the locals said was haunted by heat and shadow. This was the home of the Modoc. Rachel Colton was 18 years old, and she knew the taste of that red dust better than anything. It was the taste of her life. She was an orphan, left in the care of her uncle, Silas Colton. Their homestead was a testament to broken dreams. It was a lean-to cabin on a patch of land so mean and rocky it was a miracle a weed would grow, let alone a crop. Inside her, Rachel held a different landscape. It was a clean, polished dream of Portland. She imagined a city with wooden sidewalks that did not heave up dust with every step. She saw herself in a schoolhouse, a real one, with glass in the windows. She would have a gray wool dress, and her hands would be covered in chalk dust, not grime. She would teach children how to read, how to see the world beyond the dust. This dream was the only thing she owned that Silas could not pawn or drink. Her reality was McCrady's saloon. From noon until she was too tired to stand, she was in the back room, her hands plunged into greasy, stinging water. She washed the glasses. She scrubbed the pots. She listened to the hollow laughter of the prospectors and the bragging of the freight men. She learned to keep her eyes down and her face blank. After work, her payment was a few coins and the heavy, humiliating task of guiding her uncle home. She would find him slumped over a card table, his losses piled up around him like a wall. Silas Colton was a man who had been hollowed out by disappointment and filled back up with whiskey. He had come west 20 years before, chasing gold, but he had no luck and even less sense. Now, he was a ghost in his own life, a gambler who always lost, a drunk who always promised to stop tomorrow. He lived on the dwindling credit of his family name and, more heavily, on the silent labor of his niece. He owed money everywhere. He owed the saloon owner for his tab, the blacksmith for his mule, and the judge for his fines. Rachel's quiet presence, her steady work, was the only thing that kept the wolves of credit from his door. And then there were the other wolves, the ones the town whispered about. The Modoc, in the saloon. The talk was all savages and devils. The settlers, their faces flushed with beer and righteousness, spoke of raids and blood. They demanded the army at Fort Klamath do its job, solve the problem, and clear the land for progress. The railroad was coming. That was the new gospel. The railroad needed the Modoc land. But Rachel also heard other stories. She heard the soldiers from the fort drinking quietly in a corner. Speak of the Modoc leader, Night Bear. They did not call him a savage. They spoke of his tactics, of the way he seemed to know what the army would do before they did. They said he was a warrior. And strangest of all, they said he spoke perfect English, as clean and sharp as a scout's report. He was a shadow, a name, a contradiction that the settlers could not resolve. Rachel's life shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, an afternoon so hot the air shimmered. She was sent to the courthouse to deliver a bottle of whiskey to Judge Hemlock, a courtesy from McCrady for the judge's convenient blindness to the saloon Sunday card games. The courthouse was a small, mean building, smelling of old paper, stale tobacco, and the dry rot of summary justice. She found the judge's door ajar. She raised a hand to knock, her knuckles dusty. She heard her uncle's name. "Silas Colton's debt is significant," Judge Hemlock said. His voice was a dry rattle. $300, another voice said. A voice she did not recognize, but it was smooth. A considerable sum for a man in his position. Rachel froze. She should have left. She should have knocked. She did neither. "It is," the judge agreed. "But we have found a mutually beneficial arrangement. A way to clear the debt and solidify our new arrangement with Modoc. The girl. The girl? Rachel Colton. I am 18 years old, legally. Silas is her guardian. He has the right of assignment. We have drawn up the papers, a marriage contract." The bottle in Rachel's hand grew impossibly heavy. "Marriage, contract." She could not make the words fit. "A marriage between his niece and him," the second voice asked. "And Chief Nightbear," the judge confirmed. "It is unorthodox, but legal. The treaty is vague on these matters, and a lawful marriage. Well, it binds them to us, and it binds her to them. It clears Silas's debt to me, and it makes Nightbear's faction beholden to the law. A clever bit of policy, if I do say so myself." Rachel did not hear the reply. The blood was roaring in her ears like a river. She backed away from the door, silent as a ghost. The bottle, the whiskey, none of it mattered. She fled. She did not stop running until she was at the edge of town, her lungs burning, the red dust apaste on her tear-streaked face. Married, on a piece of paper, in a room she had not been in, to a man she had never seen. The law, the grand and towering institution, had just sold her. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the wind from her. She was not Rachel Colton, the girl who dreamed of Portland. She was not a person at all. She was chattel. She was $300. She was a mutually beneficial arrangement. She saw the town with new, terrible clarity. She saw the posters for the railroad, promising civilization. This was their civilization. A place where a judge, a saloon owner, and a broken-down gold prospector could trade a woman's life for a stack of chips and a clear ledger. The sickness in her stomach was a cold, hard knot. The world was a fraud. All of it. She waited until Silas stumbled home, long after midnight. He was drunk, but not so drunk that he could not see the look on her face. The cabin was dark, lit only by a single, guttering candle. "What is it, girl?" he muttered, fumbling for a chair. "You sold me," she said. Her voice was flat. All the tears were gone. Silas froze. He tried to build a wall of drunken bluster. "I do not know what you are talking about." "I was at the courthouse," Rachel said, her voice cutting through the small, dark room. "I heard Judge Hemlock, the marriage contract, $300. The bluster collapsed. He slumped into the chair, a sack of loose bones and sour whiskey. "Rachel, you sold me," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "To a savage, for money." "He is not a savage," Silas snapped, a rat's fury in his voice. "He is a chief. They say he is powerful." "I am going to the fort," she said, her hands clenched. "I am going to Captain Brevard." "I will tell him the judge is corrupt. I will tell him what you did." For a second, Silas looked truly terrified. He sprang up, grabbing her arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You will not," he hissed, his face close to hers. "You will ruin me. Do you understand? Hemlock signed it. The law signed it. If you fight this, I will go to jail. For debt. We lost this homestead. We lose everything." He let her go, pacing the small dirt floor. "You are a young woman. What future do you have here, huh? Washing glasses until your hands are raw, growing old in the dust. This is a chance, a chief, they say he owns land, horses. Maybe it is better than this. Maybe it is a step up for you." The words hung in the air, putrid and sharp. A step up, to be sold. Rachel looked at the man who was her only family. She looked at his weak, trembling hands, his desperate, shifty eyes. She had been angry. She had been horrified. But now, a cold, profound despair settled over her. She had believed, in some small, childish part of her heart, that there was a line of decency, a line of justice. She saw now that there was no line. There was only power. The judge had it. The railroad had it. And in his own pathetic way, Even Silas had it over her. The men who ran her world had all shaken hands. And she was the price. She said nothing more. She sat on her small cot, fully dressed, and watched the darkness in the cabin fade to a weak gray. She did not sleep. She just waited. Just before dawn, the air changed. The familiar sounds of the town waking up were absent. There was silence, and then a new sound, the soft, rhythmic tread of unshod ponies on the hard-packed earth. Rachel stood up. Her legs were stiff. She went to the cabin door and pulled it open a crack. The morning fog was thick, clinging to the ground like a shroud, but through it, she could see them. At the edge of town, where the trail began its slow climb toward the lava beds. A party of 5 men on horseback. They were Modoc. They sat their horses with a stillness that was absolute, like figures carved from the volcanic rock itself. At their head was a man who sat taller than the others. He was lean, but his shoulders were broad under a plain buckskin shirt. His black hair was tied back from his face. He was looking toward the center of town, toward the courthouse. In his hand, he held a folded piece of paper. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She did not need to be told. This was him, Nightbear. As if he felt her gaze, he turned his head. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He looked across the distance, his eyes finding the small, run-down cabin. He looked right at the crack in the door, right at her. She saw his face. It was not the monstrous, savage face from the settlers' stories. It was a hard face. Yes, a face that knew the wind and the sun. But it was not cruel. His gaze was not threatening. It was assessing, calm. He was just looking at her. Rachel clutched the rough wood of the doorframe to keep herself from falling. A terrible, ice-cold truth settled into her bones. The man they called a savage, the man who had bought her like a mule, was looking at her like she was a person. And the law, the civilized white law of Judge Hemlock, was the thing that had treated her like cargo. The papers were signed, the debt was paid, the fog was lifting, and the day had come. The final, bitter business was not done at the cabin. It was done. Like all dirty things in Jacksonville, at McCrady's saloon. It was just past 10 in the morning, an hour when the saloon smelled of sour beer, old smoke, and the damp sawdust used to cover the previous night's sins. Rachel had been brought here by Silas, who had not spoken a word, his face a mask of gray sweat. She was told to wait in the back hall, a narrow space between the kitchen and the main bar, where she could hear everything. She was not a guest. She was the final item on the ledger. She pressed her ear to the thin wood of the back office door. She heard the clink of a bottle on a glass. "The debt stands at 300, Judge Hemlock's dry voice announced. "A debt he owes to me." McCrady, the saloon owner, added. His voice was thick and wet. "And I'm tired of waiting. Silas here, he has got no color, no cattle, and no credit." "Which is why we are all here," the judge said, his tone oozing false patience. "Mister, Nightbear has made a proposal that satisfies all parties." Rachel's stomach tightened. She heard a chair scrape, and then a new voice, one she had only heard in her nightmares. But this time it was real. It was calm, deep, and had no trace of an accent. "The proposal is conditional," Nightbear said. There was a pause. The confidence of the other 2 men seemed to falter. "Conditional," McCrady grunted. "You get the girl. I got my 300. The judge gets his consideration. The deal is the deal." "The deal," Nightbear said, his voice cutting through the smoky air, "is that I do not just get the girl. I am not buying a horse. Mr. McCrady, I am making an alliance." "I do not follow," the judge said, his voice suddenly wary. "Your soldiers at Fort Klamath want to push my people onto the reservation at Yanax," Nightbear explained, as if to a child. "They want to take our lands by the Lost River. They will say we are hostile. They will look for any excuse." "This is politics, man, not business," McCrady interrupted. "It is all business," Nightbear returned, his voice dangerously quiet. "You want to sell this girl, Rachel Colton, to pay a debt. I will pay for it, but I will not have her as a prize. She must be my wife, under your laws. I want the papers. Judge, signed by you, certified by the territorial government, a legal, binding marriage. I want her to be a signal of good faith, a bridge. So when your Captain Brevard comes to clear the lava beds, he will be clearing out the lawful, white wife of a Modoc chief. He will be breaking your own law. That is my condition. Silence. Rachel felt sick. He was not a savage. He was a politician. He was smarter than all of them. He was using her, using the law, using their own greed against them. She heard Judge Hemlock clear his throat. A legal certification. This is highly irregular, but it makes a certain kind of sense. It provides a legal framework. It shows the army that we are handling the Modoc situation through diplomacy. It shows Silas gets paid, McCready grumbled. It shows the deal is done, Nightbear said. That was the word that broke her. Done. Rachel kicked the door. It flew open, slamming against the inner wall. The four men at the table froze. McCready, fat and red-faced. Judge Hemlock, thin as a rail, his eyes like chips of slate. Silas, her uncle, who flinched so hard he nearly fell from his chair. And Nightbear, he was exactly as she had seen him at dawn. He was tall, even sitting. He wore a white man's shirt, but his hair was long and black, and his eyes saw everything. He looked at her, and for a second, she saw not anger, but surprise. No, Rachel said, her voice shaking but rising with every word. She pointed a trembling finger at Silas. No, you cannot. I will not. She grabbed the nearest thing, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table. She did not throw it at Nightbear. She threw it at Silas. You cowardly drunken thing, she screamed. The glass shattered against the wall behind her uncle, spraying him with whiskey. Silas yelped and covered his face. McCready lunged to his feet, overturning his chair. You little witch, McCready roared, grabbing for her. I will not go, Rachel shrieked. Dodging him, the saloon, hearing the crash, went silent. A few curious, drunken faces peered from the bar. You cannot sell me. This is not legal. This is not right. She looked at Nightbear, her eyes blazing with tears of pure fury. I will die before I go with you. Nightbear did not move. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. That is quite enough, Judge Hemlock said. He stood up, slowly, brushing the front of his vest. He held a piece of paper in his hand. He did not look at Rachel. He addressed the peering faces in the doorway. This is a private family matter, he announced, his voice ringing with false authority. It is not, Rachel cried. It is a crime. Miss Rachel Colton, the judge said, finally turning his cold eyes on her. You are 18 years old. You are, by the law of this territory, still a minor. You have no property. You have no standing. You are the legal ward of your uncle, Mr. Silas Colton. He let the words hang in the dead air. Mr. Colton, the judge continued, as your guardian, has the legal right to arrange your affairs, including a marriage contract, for the benefit of the family. He has done so. The papers are signed. The debt is paid. He looked at McCready. McCready, get her out of this office. The deal is concluded. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. The law. He had used the law to skin her alive. She turned and ran. She did not know where she was going. She just ran. She ran past the stunned faces at the bar, out into the blinding, dusty street. She did not run to the cabin. There was nothing there for her. She ran toward the only other place of power she knew. She ran toward the fort. It was a 2-mile walk, and she ran nearly all of it. By the time she reached the gates of Fort Klamath, she was covered in sweat and red dust, her hair falling from its bun. The sentry, a young private, looked at her in alarm. I must see Captain Brevard, she panted. She was made to wait for nearly an hour on a hard wooden bench. Feeling the eyes of every soldier on her, finally, she was shown into a small, neat office. Captain James Brevard was a man who looked tired. He had a thick mustache and weary blue eyes. He stood politely when she entered. Miss Colton, he said, what can I do for you? You look distressed. In a rush, the words tumbled out. The debt, the saloon. Judge Hemlock, the contract, the sale, the man, Night Bear. She watched his face as she spoke. It went from polite concern to a careful, neutral mask. When she was finished, he sat for a long moment, steepling his fingers. "Miss Colton," he said finally, "this is a very unhappy situation." "Then you will stop it," she said, grabbing the flicker of hope. "You will arrest them. The judge, my uncle—" "I cannot," he said. "What?" "I'm a military officer. Miss Colton, I am not the law in Jacksonville. Judge Hemlock, he is the law. You just told me yourself. The papers are signed." "But it is wrong," she cried, standing up. "He is selling me. He is marrying you off." Captain Brevard corrected her, his voice firming. "It may be uncharitable. It may be cruel. But by the letter of the law, as you have described it, it is legal. A guardian's rights are extensive. This is a civil matter. My hands are tied." He would not meet her eyes. He was ashamed, but he was not going to help her. He was another man, like all the others, hiding behind paper. She left the fort. The walk back to town was a funeral march. The sun was setting, and the dust was turning a bloody red. She had no hope. There was no justice. There was only the trap. She was in the small, dark cabin, sitting on her cot, when a soft knock came at the door. It was not Silas. He was celebrating his $300 at the saloon. She opened it. A woman stood there, holding a small lantern. She was in her 40s, with a kind, worried face. Rachel recognized her. It was Margaret Brevard, the captain's wife. "Miss Colton," she whispered, looking past her into the empty cabin. "May I not stay?" "Why are you here?" Rachel asked, her voice hollow. Margaret Brevard pressed something into her hand. It was a cloth purse. It was heavy with coins. "This is not much," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. $20, but it might be enough." Rachel stared at the money. "My husband is a good man, but he is a man of rules." "Rachel," she said, "the world is not—" "Do not go back to the saloon. Do not wait for them. Tonight, take your uncle's horse. Ride north. Do not stop. There is a mission at the Dalles, a good one. They will not look for you there. They will take you in." She squeezed Rachel's hand. "Godspeed, child. Be strong." She was gone before Rachel could even say thank you. For the first time in 24 hours. Rachel's heart beat with something other than terror. It beat with a wild, thin hope. She waited. She waited until the moon was high and the town was dead. She packed a small bundle, bread, a blanket, her mother's silver locket. She crept to the lean-to where Silas kept his old mule. It was not a horse, but it would have to do. She led the mule to the edge of the property, her stockinged feet making no sound. She mounted, her skirts bunched around her, and she kicked the mule's ribs, turning it north. She was free. She was running. The cold night air felt like a baptism. She made it perhaps 4 miles. She was just past the fork in the road when she heard the horses. They came out of the trees, 3 of them, blocking the path. They were not soldiers. They were not Modoc. They were white men, rough men, the kind who worked for McCready, hunting bounties or breaking legs. "Well, well," one of them said, a large, bearded man. He grabbed the mule's bridle, stopping it short. "Look what we've found, the little runaway bride." "Let me go," Rachel said, trying to sound brave. "Afraid not," the man said, grinning. He had very few teeth. "The judge said you might try this. Said if we caught you, you were technically, what was the word? Oh, in breach of contract. A fugitive. He said to bring you back, gently, if possible. But to bring you back—" He reached up and grabbed her arm. Rachel cried out and tried to hit him. He laughed and backhanded her across the face. The blow was hard, stinging, and it knocked her sideways off the mule. She landed hard in the dust, the air forced from her lungs. The $20 spilled from her pocket, coins scattering in the moonlight. "Stupid girl," the man spat, dismounting. "Now look at what you did." He advanced on her, raising his hand again. "You are going to pay for that." A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the pines. It was Night Bear. He was on foot. He had made no sound. He was just there. He held a long knife in his hand, and he did not look angry. He looked as calm as the moon. The bounty hunter froze. His two companions, seeing the knife, seeing the man who had appeared from nowhere, did not move. Their hands stayed near their guns, but they did not draw. "This ain't your business, Modoc," the bounty hunter said, trying to sound brave. "She is my business," Nightbear said. His voice was soft, but it carried in the cold air. "We are just bringing her back, on the judge's orders." "You hit her," Nightbear stated. It was not a question. "She fought me," the man stammered. Nightbear took one step forward. The man took one step back. "The deal," Nightbear said, "was for the girl, whole, unharmed. She is the bridge. A broken bridge is useless." He looked at Rachel, who was still on the ground, clutching her stinging face. Then he looked back at the bounty hunter. "If the girl is harmed," he said, "the deal is off. My money is returned, and McCready can explain to the judge why his debt is not paid." The bounty hunter understood. He was not being threatened with a knife. He was being threatened with a contract. "We did not harm her," he spat. "She just fell." "Then leave," Nightbear said. The three men looked at each other. They were being outmaneuvered by an Indian in the middle of the night, and they knew it. But they also knew he held all the cards. The bounty hunter spat in the dust, mounted his horse, and the three of them rode off toward town, grumbling. Nightbear stood for a moment, watching them go. Then he sheathed his knife and turned to Rachel. He did not offer her a hand. He just waited. Rachel slowly, painfully, got to her feet. Her face throbbed. Her hope was gone, replaced by a deep, aching humiliation. "Thank you for nothing," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. He tilted his head. "You did not save me," she spat, her anger returning. "You saved your deal. You saved your bridge. You just wanted your merchandise and your property unharmed." He watched her, his dark eyes impossible to read in the moonlight. He stepped forward and picked up the small cloth purse. He held it out to her. She snatched it from him. "I protected your life," he said, his voice flat. "That man was going to hurt you more." "You could have stopped this," she cried, gesturing wildly. "Back in the saloon, you could have said no." "And you would be here," he said, "in the dark, with those men, or you would be back in the saloon, and McCready would be finding other ways to pay your uncle's debt. I am not the man who put you in this trap. Rachel Colton. Your own people did." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I cannot break your people's law," he said, "but I can use it. You are my wife, by their law, and I am taking you home." He whistled softly. An Appaloosa pony stepped out of the shadows. He mounted it in one fluid motion. He then grabbed the bridle of her mule. She did not move. "Come," he said. It was not a request. She had no choice. She was trapped by his logic, trapped by her own laws. She climbed back onto the mule. The new day was breaking when they reached the edge of town. A wagon was waiting. Two other Modoc men sat holding rifles, their faces impassive. And Silas. Rachel was motioned into the back of the wagon. A rope was tied loosely around her wrists, a gesture more symbolic than secure. It was for the law. She was property, being transferred. Silas stood by the wagon, twisting his hat in his hands. He looked at the ground. He looked at the trees. He looked at anything but his niece. "Uncle," Rachel said, her voice dead. He flinched. He finally looked at her. His eyes were red and full of a terrible, weak shame. "It is for the best. Rachel," he mumbled. "It is. Do not," she said. He shrank back. Nightbear nodded to the driver. The wagon lurched forward. Rachel did not look back. She sat straight, her face bruised, her hands tied, and watched the red dust of Jacksonville fade behind her. The wagon moved east, toward the rising sun, toward the black, jagged scars of the lava beds. The wagon had no springs. For 6 hours, Rachel had been a passenger in a wooden box that seemed determined to find every rock, every rut, between Jacksonville and this godless expanse. They moved east, into a world that felt stripped of all color, The red dust faded, replaced by the pale, corrosive white of the alkali flats. The air was sharp and bitter, smelling of sulfur and salt. The sun was a white fire in a bleached sky. Nightbear rode ahead on his Appaloosa, a steady, unhurried shape that never seemed to tire. 2 Modoc men rode as rear guards, their faces like stone masks. Silas had been sent back with his mule, his pockets heavier, his spine gone. Rachel's hands were raw. She had gripped the wooden side of the wagon so hard that her palms were a constellation of blisters. Her throat was a dry ache. They had offered her water from a skin, but she had refused it. It was a small, stupid act of defiance, and the only one she had left. She would not ask them for anything. She would not speak. There was no point in asking questions. The answer was in the wagon with her, a cold, invisible passenger. The answer was the signed piece of paper in Judge Hemlock's office. The answer was the $300 that had paid for her life. In the late afternoon, the world changed again. The white ground gave way to a rising tide of black. It was the lava beds. Rachel had heard the name, spoken in whispers in the saloon, but the stories had not prepared her for reality. This was not Earth. It was a wound, a vast, ancient sea of volcanic rock, frozen in mid-boil. It was a landscape of knives, of sharp spires and deep, shadowed cracks. It looked like a place where the sun had never touched, a black scar on the face of Oregon. The wagon slowed, the horses struggling to find footing on the treacherous trail. The path was narrow, winding between towering, jagged walls of black rock. It felt like they were descending into the ground, into a fortress of shadow. Rachel felt a new, colder fear. This was not a place people lived. This was a place they hid. Nightbear had stopped his horse. He was waiting at a narrow pass, a break in the rock. The wagon driver pulled the horses to a halt. "Get down," Nightbear said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the trail ahead. Rachel's legs were so stiff she nearly fell. One of the rear guards dismounted and, with a rough but impersonal grip, untied the loose rope from her wrists. The blisters on her palms tore, stinging sharply. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. She stood in the dust, her civilized dress torn and filthy, her hands bleeding. The 2 guards walked the horses through the narrow pass, the wagon wheels scraping on the stone. "This is as far as the wagon goes," Nightbear said. He turned his horse and looked down at her. "From here, you walk." He did not wait. He nudged his horse forward, and she had to stumble to keep up, her thin shoes useless on the broken rock. They walked for another 10 minutes, the pass twisting and turning, until she felt utterly lost. Then it opened. The wagon crested the last rocky ridge, and the trail fell away into a wide, shallow basin, protected on all sides by the black walls. The Modoc camp was spread out before them. Rachel stopped. Her mind, so prepared for monsters, could not process what she was seeing. It was a village. There were dozens of lodges, not made of skin, but of woven tule reeds, shaped like rounded beehives. Smoke, pale gray and fragrant, rose from smoke holes in the roofs. It smelled of sage and roasting meat. A group of children, naked and dusty, were laughing as they chased a dog. In a clearing, men sat mending weapons, their hands busy, their voices low and conversational. Near a stream, a line of women worked at scraping hides, their heads bent together, talking as they worked. There were no cages. There were no ritual fires. There were no piles of skulls. It was normal. It was so impossibly, terribly normal that it shattered every image of savage she had ever been fed. The stories from the saloon, the warnings from the settlers were lies. This was just a place where people lived. A dog barked, sensing her. The children stopped their game. The men looked up from their work. The women turned from their hides. 100 pairs of dark eyes fixed on her. The camp went silent. Rachel felt her skin crawl. This was worse than being a prisoner. She was curious. A white stain on their dark world. A figure emerged from the largest of the lodges, one set on a slightly higher piece of ground. It was Nightbear. He had passed her on the trail without her noticing. He stood in front of his lodge, waiting. He was taller than she remembered. He was sinewy, built of long, hard muscle. His black hair was tied back with a single hawk feather. He wore simple buckskin trousers and a plain shirt, but he wore them with an authority that a king in velvet might envy. He watched her approach, and his gaze was not that of a man looking at a prize. It was not filled with lust or triumph. It was the look of a man studying a difficult equation, a problem he had acquired and now had to solve. The driver of the wagon, the man who had brought her all this way, unhitched his horses. It was Silas. He had not been sent back after all. He had been made to deliver her. He climbed down from the wagon seat, his movements stiff. He was carrying a small leather pouch. He walked to Nightbear, holding it out. "Here," Silas mumbled, his eyes on the ground. "The papers, and the remainder, from the 300. Nightbear did not take the pouch. He just looked at Silas, his expression unreadable. Silas's hand wavered in the air. Finally, Nightbear took the bag and tossed it to one of his men without looking at it. "And her," Silas said, jerking his chin toward Rachel. "As agreed." Nightbear nodded. "Once." Silas gave a sharp, jerky bow. "Well," he said, "business is done. I will be going." He turned and practically ran back to the wagon. Clambering up onto the seat, he did not look at Rachel. He did not say her name. He did not say goodbye. He snapped the reins, and the empty wagon turned, its wheels groaning. He drove it back toward the pass, back toward the world that had cast her out. Rachel stood alone, in the center of the Modoc camp, and watched the last piece of her old life disappear. The silence of the camp was absolute, broken only by the fading sound of the wagon. When it was gone, a woman broke from the crowd. She was old, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her gray hair in 2 long braids. She wore a dress decorated with teeth and shells that rattled softly when she moved. She stopped in front of Rachel and looked her up and down. Her eyes were as bright and sharp as a bird's. She nodded, as if to herself. "You are here," the woman said. Her English was thick, stitched together with broken words. "I am a tall grass woman. You come." She turned and began to walk. Rachel had no choice but to follow. Tall grass woman led her past the watching faces, past the silent lodges, to a small, temporary lodge set apart from the main cluster. She pulled back the tulle flap. "Tonight, you sleep alone?" she said. "Tomorrow's ceremony." The words hit Rachel like a slap. All the fear, the humiliation, the exhaustion, crystallized into a single, hard point of rage. "No," Rachel said, her voice shaking. Tall grass woman turned, one eyebrow raised. "No," Rachel repeated, her voice gaining strength. "I am not doing any ceremony. I am not your sacrifice. I will not wear your clothes. I will not say your words. I am not one of you." She was breathing hard, her hands clenched at her sides. The tall grass woman looked at her for a long, quiet moment. She did not look angry. She looked almost amused. She shrugged, a small, elegant movement of her shoulders. "Vow or no vow," tall grass woman said, letting the flap fall closed. "You are here." Rachel was left alone in the sudden dimness of the lodge. She sank down onto a pile of furs, the rage collapsing, leaving only a hollow, trembling emptiness. She was here. She did not know how long she sat there. Hours, maybe. The sun went down. The lodge grew cold. Outside, the camp came alive. She heard them. She heard the sound of a drum, a low, steady beat. She heard voices, not the quiet murmurs of the afternoon, but laughter, shouting, singing. A fire was lit, and the smell of roasting meat and sage grew stronger, leaking through the reed walls. She was a prisoner, and they were having a party. She wrapped her arms around her knees, trembling. Every sound was a new terror. Was this the ceremony? Were they drinking, working themselves into a frenzy before they came for her? She remembered the stories from the saloon, the whispers of what savages did to white women. She was terrified of being dragged out, of being forced, and in the same breath, she was terrified of being left here, to starve, to be forgotten, to die alone in this hut. The sounds went on. The drumming, the singing. It did not sound like a war party. It sounded happy, and that, somehow, was the cruelest part. She must have dozed. She woke up with a start. The camp was quiet. The fire had died down. The only sound was the distant call of an owl. The flap of her lodge rustled. Rachel scrambled to her feet, backing against the curved wall, her heart leaping into her throat. A hand, her own, flew to her mouth to stifle a scream. A man's shape silhouetted against the pale moonlight of the doorway. It was Nightbear. He stepped inside. The lodge was small, and his presence filled it instantly. He did not bring a light. He just stood in the shadows, a block of deeper darkness. Rachel pressed herself so hard against the wall she could feel the individual reeds poking her back. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. The payment. He did not move toward her. He stood by the entrance, a good 6 feet of space between them. He just waited. He waited until her breathing, which had been a series of ragged gasps, began to slow. He waited until the only sound in the lodge was the hammering of her own heart. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. Rachel said nothing. She could not speak. "You think I have come for—" He paused, searching for the word. "For the payment, for what a husband takes from a wife." She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear of pure terror tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "Look at me," he commanded. Slowly, she opened her eyes. She could see him better now, his form outlined by the faint starlight coming through the smoke hole above. "I will not touch you," he said. His voice was flat, a statement of fact. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until you come to my lodge by your own choice." Rachel stared, confused. This was not the speech of a savage. This was not the speech of her buyer. She stammered. "Then why? Why am I here?" "I told you," he said. His voice was quiet, but it held a core of steel. "You are the bridge." He took a step, not toward her, but to the side, where he could see her more clearly in the moonlight. "Your Captain Brevard wants to move us. Your Judge Hemlock wants our land. They think we are simple. They think we are animals to be pushed from one pen to another. They will use their army. They will use their laws." He turned his head, and she could see the sharp line of his jaw. "So I will use their laws too," he said. "I have a white wife, a wife signed for by a white judge. I have a signal of good faith. I have you." The coldness of it was more brutal than a blow. "You are not a wife to me, not in the way you fear," he said. "You are a shield. You are a word on a piece of paper that I will hold up to the soldiers when they come. You are a strategy." Rachel's mind reeled. She had been prepared for a brute, a monster. She had not been prepared for this. A cold, calculating intelligence. He was not a monster. He was a general, and she was his newest weapon. "I hate you," she whispered, the words raw. He nodded, as if he had expected this. "Good," he said. "Hate is better than fear. Fear makes you weak. Hate can make you strong." He turned to leave. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice small. "Survive," he said, without looking back. "Observe. Wait. And do not cause me trouble. Your life is your own, as long as you are my wife when I need you to be." He slipped out of the lodge as silently as he had entered. The flap fell, leaving her in total darkness. Rachel sank back onto the pile of buffalo hides. She did not cry. The tears were frozen, locked behind a new, cold understanding. He was right. Hate was better than fear. She looked up at the smoke hole. Through the small, round opening, she could see a handful of stars, burning like ice in the black sky. They were distant, cold, and a world away, just like her. She could not escape. Not yet, but she could do what he said. She could survive. She could observe, and she would wait. The sun came early, a sharp blade of light through the smoke hole. Rachel had not slept. She had sat in the pile of furs, her mind racing, until her body was a single, cold ache. The lodge flap was pulled back. Tall grass woman entered, her face as impassive as the rock outside. She was not alone. Behind her was a young woman, perhaps Rachel's age, with shy, dark eyes and a hesitant smile. "This one is Willow Song," Tall Grass Woman said, pointing to the girl. "She will show you." Show her how to be a prisoner. Willow Song stepped forward, holding a bundle. She unrolled it. Inside was a dress. It was not a calico or wool dress. It was made of soft, tanned buckskin, the color of pale honey. It was simple, sleeveless, and stitched with fine sinew. Rachel stared at it. "I am not," she began, her voice hoarse. "You will." Tallgrass Woman interrupted. She pointed to Rachel's filthy, torn cotton dress. "That is the cloth of a slave. Here, you will wear the clothes of a woman." Rachel's first instinct was to refuse, to throw it on the ground, but she remembered Nightbear's words. Survive, observe. She remembered the stairs of the camp. To walk out in her ruined dress was to declare herself a defiant, broken thing. To wear this was camouflage. "Fine," Rachel whispered. She stripped off her old life. The tattered cotton dress, the petticoats, the corset that had suddenly become a symbol of a suffocating, false world. She stood bare for a moment in the dim light. Willow Song, her eyes averted, handed her the buckskin dress. Rachel pulled it over her head. The leather was supple, cool against her skin, and surprisingly heavy. It smelled faintly of smoke and sage. It fit as if it had been made for her. The Tallgrass Woman nodded. "Good. Now, we eat, then, the ceremony." The ceremony was not a choice. It was a public statement. By midday, the camp had gathered around the main fire pit. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of roasting meat. An old man, his face like a dried apple, began to chant. It was not a song, but a long, rhythmic story, his voice rising and falling with the beat of a single drum. Rachel stood where she was told, next to Nightbear. He was not dressed in buckskin. He wore a white man's trousers and a dark shirt, but over it, he wore a breastplate of polished bone that clicked when he moved. He looked at her, his eyes assessing. "This is for them," he said, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "It shows them you are not a captive." "I am a captive," she whispered back. "They must not see that," he replied, his gaze returning to the fire. The old man's chant reached a crescendo. He held his hands to the sky, then pointed them, first at Nightbear, then at Rachel. Nightbear turned to her. He held a necklace in his hand. It was a simple leather thong strung with heavy, vibrant blue beads. They looked like polished pieces of the sky. He lifted it. Rachel's instinct was to pull away. "Do not," he said, his voice a quiet order. She stood frozen as he settled the necklace over her head. His fingers brushed the skin of her neck. They were not rough, as she had expected. They were calloused, but the touch was light, and it sent a strange, cold shiver down her spine. The beads were heavy and cool against her collarbone. He stepped back. "Now, you," he said. "What?" "You must give a gift. It is the way. It shows you come with an open hand, not a closed fist." "I have nothing." "You have something," he said, his eyes flicking to her hair, which she had pinned up out of habit. She knew what he meant. Her mother's pin. It was the only valuable thing she had, a small, oval clasp of pearl, set in silver. It had been her mother's, and her grandmother's before that. It was her last piece of Portland, of her dream. To give it to him felt like the final betrayal. But to refuse, she looked at the ring of watching faces. To refuse would be an insult. It would be a declaration of war. Her hands, trembling, went to her hair. She fumbled with the clasp. She pulled the pin free. Her hair, unpinned, tumbled down her back in a heavy brown wave. She looked at the pearl in her palm. It was her, small and pale and trapped. She held it out to him. Nightbear looked at the pin, then at her. He did not take it immediately. He seemed to be weighing it, and her, in his mind. Finally, he closed his hand over it. He did not put it in his pocket. He held it. The old man gave a final, sharp cry. The drum stopped. It was done. They were, in the eyes of this camp, married. The crowd broke. The elders, came by. They nodded to her, their faces softening. Tallgrass Woman touched her arm. A gesture that might have been approved. They saw peace, but the young men, the warriors, did not. They stood in a tight, angry cluster, their arms crossed. Their stares were not welcoming. They were sharp and cold. And the coldest of all came from a man who stood near Nightbear, a man who looked like him, but younger, his features twisted with a pure, undisguised hatred. His eyes were like blue fire. This, she knew, must be a bluejacket. He looked at her, then spat on the ground. The days that followed were the hardest of her life. She was not locked in. She was not beaten. She was put to work. If she was to be Modoc, she would work as a Modoc. Tallgrass Woman and Willow Song were her teachers, and the lessons were brutal. Her life in the saloon had been drudgery, but this was labor. Her first task was to scrape hides. A deer hide was stretched on a frame, and she was given an ulu, a crescent-shaped knife, and shown how to scrape the fat and gristle from the skin. It was disgusting, bloody, back-breaking work. The smell was overpowering. Within an hour, her arms felt like they were being pulled from their sockets. The blade was awkward, and she sliced a long, shallow cut into the palm of her hand. She sat back on her heels, biting her lip against the pain, watching the blood well up. Willow Song, who had been working silently beside her, made a small noise of sympathy. She took Rachel's hand, examined the cut, and then went to a nearby sage bush. She crushed a few leaves and pressed them into the wound. It stung, but the bleeding slowed. "You must hold it so," Willow Song whispered, correcting Rachel's grip on the knife. Her hands, which she had dreamed of keeping soft for a classroom, were destroyed. They were blistered, cut, and stained. She learned to weave the tough, sharp tool reeds into mats, a task that felt like weaving with knives. She learned to grind dried roots into flour, a pounding, monotonous rhythm that lasted for hours. She learned to cook over an open fire, her face scorched, her eyes stinging from the smoke. But with the work, something else came. She was part of the women's circle. She was not a guest. She was a worker, and as they worked, the women talked. At first, they were silent, suspicious of her. But as the days passed, and she continued to show up, her hands bleeding, her face set in a mask of determination, they began to speak, and Rachel, who had been ordered to observe, began to listen. She learned their names. She learned Willow Song's husband had been killed in a skirmish with settlers 2 years before. She learned Tallgrass Woman had 2 sons at the Yinax reservation, and she learned their stories. They were not the vague, monstrous tales from the saloon. They were specific. They were full of pain. They spoke of the treaty they had signed, the one that had forced them onto the Klamath reservation. They spoke of the land, a cold, high plateau where the Modoc, who were fishermen and valley dwellers, could not grow their food. They spoke of the Klamath tribe, their ancient enemies, who ruled the reservation, beat them, and stole their government rations. "They gave us 1 blanket for 6 families," a woman named Sunbird said, her voice bitter. "In the snow. My new baby did not live." Rachel listened, the ulu knife still in her hand. This was not justice. This was something else. This was a slow, calculated starvation. She learned why they were here, in this fortress of rock. Nightbear had led them here. He had left the reservation, broken the treaty, and returned to their ancestral home by the Lost River, near these lava beds. "We came home," Tallgrass Woman said, her voice fierce. "It is better to die on our own land than to freeze in theirs." The picture in Rachel's mind began to shift. The savage Nightbear was not a raider. He was a refugee. He was a leader who had led his people out of a prison, and the civilized world, her world, was the one that had built the prison. The conflict came to find her on the 5th day. She was on her way to the small stream that ran through the camp, her arms aching as she carried 2 heavy water skins. A man stepped out from between 2 lodges, blocking her path. It was him, Bluejacket. Ooh. He was all sharp angles and fire, his frame lean, his eyes burning with a rage that seemed to be his only fuel. "Poison," he spat. He spoke English. It was perfect, better than Tallgrass Woman's. Rachel froze. "You are a poison," he repeated, stepping closer. He was not much taller than she, but he radiated a physical threat that made her stomach clench. "You smell like them. Like lies. Like paper." "I'm just getting water," she said, her voice small. "You bring their law," he said, tapping his own chest. "Here, into our home. He brings you. He brings them." He pointed a finger at her. "He thinks you are a shield. You are a disease." "I did not ask to be here," Rachel said, her fear giving way to a spark of anger. "But you are here," he shouted. And the camp, which had been humming with activity, went quiet. "You are his white wife, a piece of paper. He uses your law to protect us, but your law is a snake. It bites the hand that holds it. We should have run. We should be fighting, not this." He gestured at her. "At the camp, with disgust." He took another step, and now he was too close. She could smell the sweat and anger on him. He reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. "Let me go," she said, trying to pull away. "My wife," he whispered, his voice suddenly raw with a pain that was more frightening than his anger. "My son, they did not die in a fair fight. They were found by settlers, near Yanax, the good ones. He choked on the word. They were not worth a piece of paper. They were not worth a bridge. They were just dead." He tightened his grip, and Rachel cried out as her wrist bones ground together. "And now he brings you," Blue Jacket hissed, his face inches from hers. "A white woman. As a wife, it is an insult to her memory. It is an insult to every one of us. That is enough." The voice was not loud. It was as flat and cold as the rock under their feet. Nightbear stood 10 feet away. He had come from the main lodge, and like a ghost, no one had heard him approach. Blue Jacket did not release her. He turned his head, his eyes blazing at his cousin. The two men looked at each other, and the air in the camp crackled. It was a visible thing, a raw, coiled tension that stopped every heart. "She is my wife," Nightbear said, his voice level. "She is a white woman," Blue Jacket retorted. "And you are a fool. You're my cousin and my chief, but you're a fool. You cannot make peace with them by inviting one of them into your lodge." "It is my decision," Nightbear said. "Let her go." For a long second, Rachel thought Blue Jacket would refuse. She thought he would draw the knife at his belt. She thought he would attack his chief. The camp held its breath. Then, with a sound of pure disgust, Blue Jacket shoved her. He threw her wrist back at her, and she stumbled, falling to her knees, the waterskins dropping. He looked at Nightbear one last time. "This will end in blood, brother, and it will be your fault." He turned and stalked away, disappearing into the maze of black rock. Rachel was on the ground, shaking, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down her face. Nightbear did not move toward her. He did not help her up. He simply watched her, his face a mask of stone. "He is right," she wept, wiping her face with her bloody, dirty hand. "This is my fault. I am the poison." "Get up," Nightbear said, his voice harsh. She looked at him, stunned by the coldness. "Get up," he repeated. "He did not hurt you because you are white. He hurt you because he is in pain, and you are a symbol. Do not give him the power. Do not be weak." He turned and walked back to his lodge, leaving her on her knees in the dust. Willow song. Her face pale, ran up and helped her to her feet, gathering the waterskins. Rachel, her wrist throbbing, finally understood. This was not a united camp. It was a barrel of gunpowder. Nightbear was trying to hold the lid on, and Blue Jacket was trying to light the fuse, and she was sitting right on top of it. That night, Nightbear came to her lodge. She had not seen him since the confrontation. He did not enter. He just stood at the flap. "Your strategy is failing," she said, her voice bitter. She was rubbing her bruised wrist. "No," he said. "It is just beginning." He stepped inside, but he did not sit. "The army is moving," he said, his voice low. "The scouts came in an hour ago. They are massing at Fort Klamath. They have wagons, cannons. They are not coming to talk. They are coming to remove us." Rachel's blood ran cold. So what Blue Jacket said, he is right. It is war. "It is not war yet," Nightbear said. It is politics. They are moving the pieces, so I must move mine." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than calculation in his eyes. She saw a deep, profound exhaustion. "This marriage," he said, "this bridge is the last card I have to play. Before the guns start, I need them to see you. I need them to know that to fire on us is to fire on one of their own." "You are placing a bet," she said, horrified. "On my life." "I am placing a bet on all our lives," he corrected her. "Yours, mine, Willow Song's, even his." He gestured toward the camp, in the direction Blue Jacket had gone. "I am betting that their fear of their own law is stronger than their greed." Rachel sat on the furs, her world tilting. She hated him for it. She hated him for being so cold, for using her as a piece on his game board. But a deeper, more terrible understanding was dawning. She thought of Sunbird's baby, dead from the cold. She thought of Willow Song, a widow at 18. She thought of Blue Jacket's wife and son, murdered by settlers. Her idea of justice, of a clean line between right and wrong, had been a luxury, a story told in a safe world. Here, there was no right, there was only survival. There was only the least terrible choice. "They will not care," she whispered. "They will just shoot. They will say I was a captive. They will say you forced me." "Perhaps," he agreed, "but it will make them hesitate, and in that hesitation, we might find a new path." He looked down at her hands, which were clutched in her lap. They were raw, the skin broken from the day's work. The cut she had given herself with the ulu was red and inflamed. Before she could react, he knelt in front of her. He took her hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He examined the cut, his thumb brushing the angry red skin around it. "This is infected," he said. "It is fine," she said, trying to pull her hand away. His touch was unsettling. It was too personal. "Be still," he ordered. He reached to the pouch at his belt and took out a small container. He opened it. Inside was a dark, greasy salve that smelled of pine and herbs. With a tenderness that was completely at odds with his harsh words, he rubbed the salve into the cut. His fingers were warm. A strange, sharp spark, like a static shock, jumped from his skin to hers. It was not sexual. It was something else, a current of life. Rachel gasped. A small, involuntary sound. He stopped. His eyes met hers. The lodge was dark, but they were inches apart. She could see the faint reflection of the stars in his pupils. She could smell the sage on his clothes, the pine from the salve. The world suddenly shrank to the space between them. He was the man who had bought her. He was the man who was using her. And he was the man who was, at this very moment, gently tending her wound. He looked as flustered as she felt. His composure, the iron mask he wore, had cracked. He let go of her hand as if it had burned him. He stood up, retreating to the safety of the doorway. "Willow Song will bring you more salvation," he said, his voice once again flat. "All business. Keep it clean." He was gone. Rachel sat for a long time, staring at her hand. The stinging pain was gone, replaced by a warm, tingling numbness. She did not know what to feel. She hated him. She feared him. She was his prisoner. She was his shield. She stood up and walked to the lodge entrance. She looked out at the camp. The fires were low. The great black walls of the lava beds rose up around them, a fortress against the world. Far away, to the west, she saw a faint, pale glow on the horizon. The lights of Jacksonville, Fort Klamath, the world that had sold her. She was standing on a cliff she had not known existed, and she understood, with a terrible, sinking clarity, that a war was coming. She was not just a witness. She was not just an excuse. She was, as he had said, the bridge. And a bridge was a thing that both sides, in a war, would try to control or destroy. The news arrived like a change in the wind. The scouts, 2 young men who had been gone for 3 days, rode into camp not with the easy pace of a return, but with the desperate, lathered urgency of a chase. They slid from their horses, their chests heaving, and went straight to Nightbear's lodge. Within an hour, the camp knew. The word spread from lodge to lodge, a cold whisper that snuffed out the normal sounds of the afternoon. The women stopped their work. The children, sensing the fear, stopped their play and clung to their mother's legs. The soldiers were not a rumor. They were a fact. Hundreds, Sunbird whispered to Rachel, her hand still in a bowl of ground flour. Not just a patrol. They bring the big wagons. They bring the fire cannons. An emergency council was called. It was not a formal, planned event. It was a gravitational pull. The men of the camp, the elders, the warriors, all gathered in the central space, their faces grim. The sun was hot, but the mood was cold. Nightbear emerged from his lodge. He walked to the center of the ring, his face a mask. He was not alone. He stopped, turned, and waited. He was waiting for her. Rachel's heart stopped. She was in her own lodge, watching. He was looking right at her. "Come," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the camp. Every head turned, every pair of eyes in the camp, 100 of them, fixed on her. This was not a request. It was a summons. It was a statement. Willow's song, who was near her, made a small sound of fear. Tallgrass woman, across the fire pit, just watched, her ancient face unreadable. Rachel's legs felt like stone. To walk out there, into that circle of angry, terrified men, was the most frightening thing she had ever done. But to refuse was to fail his test, to prove she was weak. She took a breath. Survive. Observe. She pulled her shoulders back. She kept her head high. She walked out of the lodge, the dust of the camp soft under her moccasins, and did not stop until she was standing at his side. The silence was a physical weight. She could feel the hatred from the cluster of young warriors. She could feel the confusion from the elders. Nightbear did not look at her. He pointed to a small stool, one that had been brought for an elder, and placed it behind his own seat. "Sit," he said. She sat. She was in the circle, not as a member, but as a thing, a piece of property, a symbol. A low, animal growl came from the far side of the circle. The blue jacket was on his feet. His entire body was rigid, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. He did not look at Rachel. He looked at Nightbear. "What is this?" "She is my wife," Nightbear said, his voice flat. "She is a white," the blue jacket roared. "This is a council of the people, of warriors. We are here to speak of blood, and you bring a pet. You shame us, you shame the memory of... She is the bridge." Nightbear cut him off, his own voice rising, hard as iron. "She is the reason they hesitate. She is the reason we are having this council, and not fighting from the rocks already. She has a right to hear. She will sit." He sat down, a clear dismissal. Blue Jacket looked as if he was going to charge across the circle. His hand was on his knife. The air was electric. Every man was poised for violence. "Sit, nephew," a quiet voice said. An old man, the elder Rachel had seen at the wedding, raised a thin, spotted hand. Gray cloud. Blue Jacket stared at him, his chest heaving. The word nephew was a reminder of respect, of lineage. After a long, terrible moment, Blue Jacket sat, but he did not relax. He sat on the balls of his feet, a panther ready to spring, his eyes burning with blue fire, fixed on Rachel. "The scouts have spoken," Nightbear began, as if the outburst had not happened. "The army at Fort Klamath has 300 new men. They have 12 wagons of supplies. They have 2 cannons. They are preparing a campaign to cleanse the lava beds. This is what the agent at Yanax has been demanding. The governor has signed the order. We have perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 1. A heavy silence fell. This was it. The abstract threat had become a date on a calendar. "We must move," a warrior said, his voice rough. "Deeper, to the caves. Make them come in. We know the tunnels. They do not... We must fight," another voice called out. Blue Jacket stood up again, but this time he was not raging. He was cold. He was a general. He is right, Blue Jacket said. But not to hide, to fight. We know this land. They do not. Their blue coats are a target against the black rock. They will come in a line. We will come from above, from the sides, from behind. We can kill 100 of them for every one of us. And then what? Nightbear asked, his voice quiet. Then we kill 100 more, Blue Jacket said. We make the price for this land so high, they will choke on the blood. We will make them pay for every wife, every child they have murdered. We will fight until they are broken, or we are all dead. It is a good day to die. It is better than living as a dog at Yanax. A deep, powerful cheer went up from the young warriors. They were on their feet, their knives in their hands. They were ready. They were young. They believed they could not be killed. And your wife, Nightbear said, his voice still quiet. But now it cut through the noise like a razor. Your son. Will killing 100 soldiers bring them back? Blue Jacket's face went white. He had no answer for that. To fight them, Nightbear continued, standing, is to do what they want. They want us to be savages. They are begging for a massacre. So they can write about it in their newspapers, so the governor can say, I told you so, and send 1,000 more men, so they can justify wiping us off the earth. He pointed to the ground. This is not a battlefield. This is our home. We do not defend a home by filling it with our own dead. Blue Jacket offers you a glorious death. I am offering a chance to live. How? Grey Cloud asked, his voice silencing the murmurs. By what magic? Nightbear turned, and for the first time he pointed at Rachel. By using her, he said, his voice ringing. She is not just a shield. She is a voice. We will not wait for them to come to us. We will go to them. We will go to Fort Klamath. We will pray, and we will bring her. We will bring his lawful white wife. We will show them we are not savages hiding in a cave. We are a people, with a treaty, with a bridge. We will use their own law. We will use her to prove our good faith. The camp was stunned. It was a bold, insane move. Blue Jacket laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. A parley. You are a dog going back to the man who kicked it. They will not parley. They will put you in chains. They will take her, say she was a captive, and they will hang you for it. It is suicide. It is cowardice. It is a strategy, Nightbear said. It is betrayal, the Blue Jacket roared. The two men were face to face. The debate was over. It was a rupture. Enough! Grey Cloud's voice was frail, but it held an authority that stopped even the two cousins. The old man stood up. A slow, painful process. He leaned on a stick. He looked at Nightbear. He looked at the Blue Jacket. Then his old, watery eyes turned. And they found Rachel. The entire camp, every man, followed his gaze. Rachel felt her blood turn to ice. We have heard the warriors, Grey Cloud said, his voice wheezing slightly. But we have a new person in our lodge, a white daughter. She was born of them. She knows their minds. He pointed a thin, trembling finger at Rachel. You will speak, he said. Rachel's mouth went dry. This was not possible. She was the property, the symbol, the shield. She was not a person, not here. Speak, he commanded again. Louder. Nightbear was looking at her. His face was stone. He was giving her no help. This was her test. She stood up. Her legs were shaking so hard she thought she would fall. She looked at the faces, the angry, young faces of the warriors, the desperate, pleading faces of the elders. She looked at Blue Jacket, who looked at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. What could she say? Her mind raced. She could tell the truth. She could tell them what she had heard in the judge's office, that her people were corrupt, that they had sold her, that Silas was a coward, that McCready was a beast, that the law was a lie. If she said that, if she confirmed their deepest fears that there was no honor at all in the white world, they would choose Blue Jacket's path. They would vote for war, and they would all die. She knew it. Cannons, 300 men, they would be slaughtered. But she could not lie. She could not stand here and sugarcoat. She could not say, My people are good. They will listen to reason. That was a betrayal of Sunbird's baby, Blue Jacket's wife. She had to find a third path, the one Nightbear was looking for. "Aye," she started, and her voice was a weak croak. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing strength into her words. "I cannot tell you if your path is right, or if this is right." She pointed to Blue Jacket, then to Nightbear. "I am not a warrior. You are white." Blue Jacket sneered. "Tell us what they think." "That is the point," she said, her voice finding its footing. "They are not one person. You think of the white man, but he does not exist." She saw Nightbear's head turn, just slightly. He was listening. "In Jacksonville," she said, her voice growing stronger, "there is Judge Hemlock. He is a greedy man. He is a man who uses the law to get what he wants. He is a man who would sell his own soul. He is the man who signed my marriage paper. He is the man who wants your land for the railroad. He is a man who wants you dead." A murmur of anger went through the crowd. "I knew it," a warrior said. "But," Rachel said, holding up a hand, "there is also Captain Brevard. At the fort, he is a man of rules. He is a weak man. Maybe he would not help me, but he was ashamed. He is not Judge Hemlock. He does not want a war. He just wants for the rules to be followed." She was thinking aloud, finding the path as she spoke. And in Portland, in San Francisco, in the big cities back east, there are other people. People who have never seen a Modoc. People who— She remembered the tattered newspaper she had seen in the saloon. People who read newspapers. People who argue. People who vote. She looked directly at the Blue Jacket. "If you fight, if you kill 100 soldiers, Judge Hemlock will win. He will write to the newspapers. He will say, 'The savages have risen. They have massacred our boys.' And all those people, the ones in Portland, in San Francisco, will believe him. They will demand your extermination, and the army will send 1,000 men. They will send their cannons, and they will grind this rock, and you, into dust. I have read it. It has happened to other tribes. It is what they do." The camp was deathly silent. She turned to Nightbear. "But if you parley, if you go to them with me and you show them the papers from Judge Hemlock, you show them you are not a savage, but a man who has followed their law, and they still attack." She took a deep breath. "Then Judge Hemlock does not get his story. You get your story. The story will be, the army has attacked peaceful people. They have attacked a white woman living with her lawful husband. And those people in Portland will not call for your extermination. They will call for Judge Hemlock's head. They will call for Captain Brevard's court-martial. You will be using their own rules against them. Not with a gun, but with public opinion, with politics." She finished. She was breathing as hard as if she had run a mile. She had no idea if what she said was true. It was a gamble, a terrible, long-odds gamble, but it was the only one she could see. Gray Cloud stared at her. His ancient eyes were sharp. "This is public opinion. It is a stronger weapon than a rifle." "Sometimes," Rachel whispered. "In their world, yes." Gray Cloud nodded. Slowly, he sat back down. "We will vote," he said. "This is madness," Blue Jacket yelled. "She is a witch. She is twisting words. You will all be killed." "We will vote," Gray Cloud repeated. "For the path of blood, with a Blue Jacket. Or for the path of paper, with Nightbear." It was a show of hands. Rachel could not watch. She looked at the ground. She heard the men moving, choosing sides. "For Blue Jacket," Gray Cloud called. She heard the sound of feet, of men shifting. "For Nightbear," he called. A long, agonizing silence. "The count is close," Gray Cloud announced. "But it is done. 23 for Nightbear, 17 for the Blue Jacket." The camp had broken in two. "We go to Fort Klamath," the old man said. "Nightbear will lead, and the White Daughter, she will go with him." The Blue Jacket stood up. He did not look at anyone. He looked at the black stone wall of the pass. "I will not," he said. "I will not walk into this trap. When they have your heads, and they have her, I will be here. I and the 17 men who still have honor. And I will take over this war. And I will fight it as it should be fought." He turned. and with his 17 warriors, he stalked away. He did not just leave the council. He left the main camp, moving deeper into the black, jagged rocks. He was gone. The council was over. They had won, but they had divided their people. Rachel was dismissed. She went to her lodge, her body shaking, and collapsed on the furs. She did not know how much time had passed when the flap rustled. It was dark outside. Nightbear stood in the entrance. She looked at him, her throat tight with a dozen conflicting emotions. He stepped inside. He was holding something. "You spoke well," he said. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact. "I just said what I thought," she mumbled. "You showed them a path. That is what a leader does." He came closer. He was holding a small, dark object, a knife. It was not a large scalping knife. It was small, in a beaded sheath. A woman's knife. Practical. Sharp. He held it out to her. She stared at it. "We ride at dawn," he said. "To the fort. You, me, and 5 others. Gray Cloud will stay here, and he will pray that Blue Jacket does not kill him." He pushed the knife toward her. "Take it." She took it. The leather hilt was warm from his hand. "This is not a safe world," he said, his voice low. "I cannot always be there to stop men from hurting you. My people are angry. Your people are greedy. You may need this, to protect yourself. From either of us." She clutched the knife. It was heavy. It was real. It was a terrible, necessary gift. They stood in the darkness, the silence stretching. He had not left. "Why me?" she whispered, the question that had been burning in her. "Why did you choose me? A piece of paper you could have. You could have just fought." He was silent for a long time. "I saw you," he said, his voice so quiet she barely heard him. "At the courthouse. Weeks ago. I was in town to trade. I saw you arguing with McCready. About the price. For flour. You were not afraid of him. You stood straight. Your eyes, you had fire." He had seen her before. "I knew," he said, "that the army was coming. I knew I needed something they did not expect. A woman with fire is better than 100 men with guns." He reached out, his hand, not to hurt, not to take. He gently, with one calloused finger, touched her cheek. She flinched, but did not pull away. "You have soot on your face," he whispered. He brushed the dark smudge away. His touch was light. It was the same touch he had used on her wounded hand. It was a touch that saw her. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he, too, were surprised by the gesture. "Get some sleep, Rachel Colton," he said, his voice once again that of the chief. "Tomorrow, we will go and talk to the men with cannons." He left. Rachel sat in the dark, clutching the knife. She was no longer a slave. She was no longer just a wife. She was a woman with fire. She did not sleep. She waited for dawn. At sunrise, a small party of 7 riders left the camp. The red dust of the alkali flats rose up to meet them. From high on a black volcanic cliff, a lone figure watched them go. His eyes were the color of a cold, blue flame. This was not a ride. It was a flight. Nightbear set a pace that was brutal, a ground-eating lope that did not slacken. There was no conversation, only the rhythmic drumming of hooves, the creak of leather, and the panting breath of the horses. Rachel was not a rider. She had spent her life on her feet, or on the back of a slow mule. Now she was on a Modoc pony, a small, wiry beast with a tireless spirit. After the first hour, her legs were screaming. After the third, her spine felt like a rod of hot iron. Every muscle ached, but she did not complain. She just clenched her teeth, gripped the horse's mane, and held on. She looked at Nightbear, riding at the head of their small column. He rode as if he were part of the horse, a single, fluid being. He never looked back. His focus was always forward, his eyes scanning the horizon, reading the land in a language she could not understand. They were not safe here. This was no man's land between the lava beds and the fort. It was an open, exposed country, and it belonged to the highest bidder, or the man with the fastest gun. Nightbear led them through dry arroyos and low, rocky hills, avoiding the main trails. He was not just avoiding the army, he was avoiding the scalp hunters, the cowboys, the prospectors. In this land, any white man with a rifle would shoot a Modoc on sight, and any Modoc would do the same in return. And she was a woman in a buckskin dress, riding with 6 Modoc warriors. She was a target for everyone. Late in the afternoon, they were crossing a shallow, grassy valley when a wagon appeared. Trundling toward them from a stand of pines, a settler's wagon. Nightbear held up a hand. The party stopped. The wagon also stopped. A man with a long rifle was in the driver's seat. A woman with a pale, frightened face peered from under the canvas. The man, his face a mask of suspicion and fear, lifted his rifle and aimed it squarely at Nightbear's chest. "That is far enough, savage!" the man yelled, his voice cracking. "What are you doing with her? Did you take her?" He meant Rachel. He saw her pale skin, her brown hair. He saw a white woman with Indians. His mind filled in the only story it knew. Nightbear did not reach for his own rifle. He simply sat on his horse, his hands resting on his thighs. "Let the girl go," the man shouted. "Let her go, and we will not shoot." Rachel's heart was in her throat. She looked at the settler's terrified, angry face. She looked at Nightbear, who was calm, but whose men had tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons. This was a spark. This was how a massacre started. A misunderstanding. A word. This was her. She realized. This was her role. "He did not take me," Rachel called out, her voice high and clear. The settler's head snapped toward her. He stared, his rifle wavering. "What did you say, girl?" Rachel urged her pony forward 2 steps, moving out from behind the line of warriors. She moved between Nightbear and the settler's rifle. "I am not his captive," she said, her voice shaking, but loud. "I am his wife, his lawful wife." The settler's jaw dropped. He stared at her as if she had raised a second head. His wife, beside him, gasped. "That is a lie," the man stammered. "He has bewitched you." "My name is Rachel Colton," she said, speaking the words she had rehearsed in her mind at the council. "My uncle, Silas Colton, arranged the marriage. It was signed and certified by Judge Hemlock in Jacksonville. It is legal. We are on our way to Fort Klamath on business. The name's Silas. Judge Hemlock. Jacksonville." These were words the settler understood. They were the anchors of his world. And they were being attached to an idea that was impossible in Indian with a lawful, white wife. The man's rifle lowered. He was not angry anymore. He was confused. He looked at Nightbear, then at Rachel, then back again. He saw her buckskin dress. He saw the blue beads at her neck. "God help you, child," the man whispered, his face a mix of pity and disgust. He clearly thought she was insane, or just as bad. He wanted no part of this. It was too complicated. It was not a clean fight. He snapped his reins. "Get on, Martha!" He drove the wagon past them, giving their ponies a wide, wide berth. He did not look at them again. The Modoc party sat in silence, watching the wagon go. Rachel felt a wave of dizziness. She turned her pony. The 5 warriors were staring at her, not with hatred, not with anger, but with a new, strange respect. She had faced a white man with a gun, and she had not flinched. She had used paper. She looked at Nightbear. His face was unreadable, but he nodded. Once, a small, sharp acknowledgement. It was, she realized, the first time she had ever felt proud. She had said the words, "I am his wife." She had told them to save her life, to save their lives. But as she said them, a part of her, a small, strange part, had not been lying. She was his wife, in the eyes of the law, and now, in the eyes of the world. She had chosen her side. They rode on, the sun dipping low. Nightbear did not slow down. He pushed them into the twilight, into the deep, cold shadows of the pine forests that ringed the valley. He finally called a halt when the moon was high and the air was thin with cold. They were in a deep, narrow canyon, a place with high, protective walls and a small stream. It was a defensible, hidden place. No fire was lit. A fire could be seen for miles. They ate in the cold darkness, dried meat in cold water. It was a miserable meal. Rachel's entire body was a symphony of pain. She dismounted and her legs simply gave out. She collapsed against the canyon wall, her body trembling with exhaustion and the biting cold. The high desert night was not like the valley. The cold was a living thing. It seeped through her buckskin dress, through her skin, and into her bones. She began to shiver, deep, racking shivers she could not control. The other warriors wrapped themselves in their blankets and, within minutes, were asleep. They were used to this. Rachel had only the small blanket from her lodge. It was not enough. She sat, her arms wrapped around her knees, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they would break. She was going to be sick. She was going to die of cold, here in this ditch. She heard footsteps. Nightbear was standing over her. He was a tall shadow against the stars. "You are cold," he stated. "I am fine," she said. He made a sound of impatience. He unslung his own heavy buffalo robe from his saddle. It was a thick, massive thing. He threw it. It landed on her, and it was like being covered in a mountain. It was heavy, and it smelled of sage, horse, and a faint, masculine musk. She pulled it around her. The shaking did not stop. The cold was inside her now. He sat down, not beside her, but near the fire pit that was not lit. He sat, his back against the rock, his rifle across his knees. He was taking the first watch. "This is foolish," he said into the darkness. "The cold will make you sick. A sick bridge is no good to me." "I can't," she stamped Merritt, her voice thick. "I cannot get warm." He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the wind, a high, lonely moan as it passed over the top of the canyon. "My first wife," he said, his voice soft, conversational, was named Fire Song. Rachel stopped shaking for a second. She stared at the shadow. He had never, ever spoken of anything personal. "She was Modoc," he said, his voice quiet, like he was talking to the wind. "She was not like you. She was not a woman of fire. She was quiet. She knew how to weave. Her hands were good. She made me laugh." He paused. "When we were sent to Yanax the first time, the cold was like this. But it lasted for 5 moons. The Klamath gave us no food. The agent gave us thin blankets. The soldiers brought the coughing sickness. She died in the snow. Her and our son. He was 1 year old." He stopped. The wind was the only sound. Rachel was no longer cold. A different, deeper chill had settled over her. This was the man Blue Jacket accused of being a fool. This was the man who had lost everything. The same thing. Blue Jacket's wife and son, she whispered. "Yes," Nightbear said, his voice hard. "The story over. The same. Only his were killed by settlers. Mine by policy, by a cold, bad place. A slow death on bad land." He had used her words. "I am sorry," she whispered, and she was. A deep, aching sorrow. Not for him, but for all of it. The wind picked up, and a new, icy blast found its way into the canyon. Her body, despite the new understanding, betrayed her. The shivering started again, violent and uncontrollable. Nightbear sighed. It was a sound of deep frustration. "Rachel," he said. "Yes." "I am not your uncle. I am not Judge Hemlock. I am not the man who hits you in the dark." "I know. I will not," he said, his voice very precise. "Pull you. I will not drag you. I will not force. That is not our way. And it is not my way." He shifted. "But you are shaking apart. And I need you to be strong tomorrow. I need you to speak. I cannot make you sick." He held out his own blanket, which he had been sitting on. "You have a choice," he said. "You can stay there and suffer, or you can come here. The robe is big enough. My body is warm. It is a choice, your choice." She stared at the shadow, at the offered space. He was her husband. He was her captor. He was her general. He was a man who had just shown her his deepest wound, and he had given her a choice. She was so cold. She was so cold. Slowly, painfully, her stiff limbs protesting. She stood up. She walked the 3 feet that separated them. She stood in front of him. He did not move. He just waited. She sat down. She did not sit beside him. She sat as he had, with her back to the rock. "That is not," he began, and then stopped. "This is a bad choice," she said, her teeth chattering. "It is a practical choice," he said. His voice grew. "Uff." He shifted, and she felt him move. He was not touching her. He was just there. The heat coming off his body was a physical thing, a solid wall of warmth. She was still shivering. "This is not working," she said, her voice small. He sighed again. "Turn," he said. "What?" "Turn sideways. Put your back here." He patted his own shoulder. It was the most scandalous, intimate, and terrifying instruction she had ever received. But she was so cold. She turned. She leaned back. She was not leaning on the rock. She was leaning on him. His shoulder was as hard as the canyon wall, but it was warm. He was solid. He was real. "This is better," she whispered. He did not reply. She felt his hand move. He was not touching her. He was pulling the heavy buffalo robe. He raised it, and then it settled. He had pulled it over both of them. Now, they were in a small, warm tent of fur and shared body heat. The wind was a distant, angry noise. And here, it was still. It was warm. Her shivering began to slow. The deep, aching cold in her bones began to recede. She was pressed against his side. She could feel the hard muscle of his arm. She could hear his heart. It was beating, a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. It was the most lively sound she had ever heard. "Your heart is loud," she murmured, her voice drowsy. "It is working," he replied, his voice a low rumble in his chest that she could feel against her back. They sat in silence. "You are afraid," he said. "Yes." "Of me?" "No," she said, and she was surprised to find that it was true. "Of tomorrow, of the fort, the cannons, of Captain Brevard. And what if they do not listen? What if it is all for nothing?" "Then it is for nothing," he said, his voice flat. "Then Blue Jacket is right, and we die. But we die trying. Not in a cage." "I do not want to die," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "Fire song, she did not want to die. My son did not know how. It is not a good thing. To die for nothing." He shifted, and his arm, the one she was leaning against, moved. It settled on her shoulder, a light, impersonal weight. Not an embrace, just a guard, an anchor. "Get some sleep, Rachel," he said. "Your fire will need to be hot tomorrow." She closed her eyes. She was leaning against her husband, her buyer, her chief, and for the first time in her entire 18-year-long life, she felt safe. She fell asleep. She woke to the smell of dust. She was on the ground, wrapped in the buffalo robe. Alone, the sun was up. The camp was awake, the men already packing the horses. Nightbear was at the stream, his back to her. He was washing his face. He was not looking at her. The night, the canyon, the warmth, it was over. It was a secret. She stood up. Her body was still sore, but the deep, bone-chilling cold was gone. She felt strong. They rode, and by noon, they saw it. Fort Klamath. It was not a fortress. It was a scar, a collection of raw, unpainted wooden buildings, surrounded by a high wooden palisade. It sat in the middle of the dusty plain like a child's forgotten, broken toy. An American flag, too large, hung limply from a pole. As they approached, a sentry on the wall saw them. "Riders!" he yelled. "Armed, they are Modoc." The place exploded into activity. It was like kicking an anthill. Blue-coated soldiers ran along the palisade, their rifles appearing in the small slots. The heavy wooden gate of the fort creaked open, and a line of soldiers ran out, forming a defensive line, their rifles leveled. Nightbear held up his hand. His party stopped. 100 yards from the line of guns, he held his own rifle in the air, muzzle up, a sign of parley. "We are here to speak," Nightbear called out. The line of soldiers parted. 2 men walked out. One, Rachel recognized instantly. It was Captain James Brevard. He looked even more tired than she remembered. The other man was new. He was not a soldier. He wore a fine, dark city suit, a bowler hat, and a look of profound, arrogant distaste. He looked at the dust on his polished shoes as if it had personally offended him. They stopped 20 feet from Nightbear. Captain Brevard looked at the 6 Modoc warriors. Then he saw Rachel. His jaw went slack. His face, which had been a mask of military duty, crumbled. My God," he whispered. "Miss Colton." The other man, the man in the suit, looked at her. His eyes were cold, like a fish's. "So," he said. "This is the captive." Rachel sat up straighter. "I am not a captive, sir," she said, her voice clear in the still air. Brevard looked at Nightbear, his expression a mask of stunned confusion. "She is alive. She is well. She is my wife, Captain," Nightbear said, his voice calm. "As you know, we are here to speak to the governor." "The governor is not here," the man in the suit snapped. "I am Edmund Stiles. I am the governor's representative, and I will be handling this situation." He looked at Nightbear with open contempt. "You are to surrender your weapons, Chief, and you will turn over the captive. Then we can discuss your relocation." Nightbear did not look at Stiles. He looked at Brevard. "We are here for a parley. Captain, a parley means we talk, not this." Brevard was torn. He looked at Stiles, then at Nightbear, then at Rachel. Let them come in." "Stiles," Brevard said, his voice low. Just to talk." "It is irregular." "It is an outrage," Stiles said. But he was looking at Rachel. He was calculating. He, too, could see the story. "Very well. 2 of you. In my office. No weapons." The negotiation had begun. The office was the same one where Rachel had cried, begging for help. It felt like a lifetime ago. Nightbear and Rachel sat on one side of Brevard's desk. Stiles sat behind it, as if it were his. Brevard stood, awkwardly, by the window. "The governor," Stiles began, steepling his fingers, "is a patient man, but his patience is at an end. This illegal squatting in the lava beds will stop. The railroad is coming. Progress is coming. You cannot just stand in the way of development." He smiled, a thin, reptilian smile. "So, he has authorized this relocation. To the reservation. It is a good place. Warm, plenty of food." "It is a lie," Nightbear said. Stiles's smile faded. "I beg your pardon." "It is a slow death on bad land," Rachel said. All 3 men looked at her. She had not planned to speak. The words had just come out. "It is a prison," Rachel continued, her voice gaining strength. She was thinking of Sunbird's baby. "Where the agent steals the rations, and the Klamath steal the blankets. Where the land is too cold to grow food, and the water is bad. It is a place to die, slowly, where no one can see you." Stiles stared at her. "Miss Colton, you have been through an ordeal. You are clearly not yourself." "I am exactly myself," Rachel said, standing up. "I am the wife of a man whose people were promised that land, and then we were starved for it. And I am telling you, he will not go back. We will not go back." Nightbear looked at her, his eyes blazing. It was not anger, it was something else. It was that fire. Stiles was on his feet, his face red. "This is not a negotiation. This is a preliminary hearing, Captain. We want to see the governor," Nightbear said, his voice a low rumble. "We will not talk to a clerk." "We will talk to the man who signs the paper." "That is impossible," Stiles sputtered. "The governor does not meet with hostiles." "Then we are done," Nightbear said. He, too, stood up. He nodded at Rachel. They walked to the door. "This is not over," Stiles shouted at their backs. "You will be in chains, I will." They did not look back. They walked out of the office, across the parade ground, and back to their horses. The soldiers watched them, their faces a mix of confusion and awe. They mounted. Nightbear looked at the palisade. Rachel followed his gaze. There, in a neat, orderly row, were the cannons. Not 2, 6. They were not for show. They were polished. They were aimed. They were ready. Nightbear met her eyes. He did not have to say a word. He knew, and she knew. The parley was a sham. The conversation was a lie. This was not a negotiation. It was just a delay. War was coming. It was as real and as deadly as the black, polished mouths of those guns. The ride back from Fort Klamath was a silent, grinding journey. The hope that had carried them there, a thin, brittle thing, was gone. In its place was the cold, heavy certainty of those 6 polished cannons. Nightbear did not speak, his face carved from the same dark rock that surrounded them. He had his answer. The governor's deal was not a deal. It was a death sentence, wrapped in paper. Relocation, rations for 1 year. Then you were on your own. It was Yanex, all over again. It was a slow, deliberate strangulation. When they crested the ridge overlooking their camp, it was empty. The Thule lodges were gone. The fire pits were cold. It was as if the earth had swallowed them. Rachel's heart seized. She looked at Nightbear, but he was already scanning the rocks. His eyes narrow. A signal, a flicker of light, came from a high crevice, a place that looked like nothing more than a shadow. He nodded, then dismounted, leading his horse into a narrow, hidden trail that Rachel had never seen. They walked for 10 minutes, the path twisting deep into the earth, until the pass opened into a vast cavern, a natural cathedral of black stone, open to the sky. The entire camp was here. Blue Jacket had not been idle. He had moved them, every man, woman, and child, into the heart of the lava beds. This was not a camp. It was a fortress. The women were in the deep caves, safe from cannon fire. The men had built stone breastworks, low walls of black rock. At every narrow pass, they had clear, overlapping lines of fire. They controlled the high ground, and in the deepest, most hidden cave, a spring of clean, cold water bubbled from the rock. Blue Jacket stood on a ledge, his arms crossed. He was not angry. He was smug. "So," he called down as Nightbear entered the cavern. The parley did not go well. "Cousin," Nightbear's face was grim. He did not rise to the taunt. He walked to the center, where Gray Cloud and the elders sat. "You were right," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "The governor will not talk. His man, Styles, offered only Yanex. It is a slow death, or a fast one." "Then it is a fast one," Blue Jacket said, leaping down from the ledge. "But it will be their fast death, not ours." They did not have to wait long. 3 days later, the army arrived. It was not a patrol. It was an invasion. From the high watchtowers, Rachel stood beside Willow's Song and watched them come. A long, beautiful, terrible snake of blue and gold, stretching for miles. Hundreds of soldiers, supply wagons, ambulances, and, pulled by teams of groaning mules, the cannons. They surrounded the entire perimeter of the lava beds. The siege had begun. By noon, a single officer, a young lieutenant under a white flag, rode to the edge of the pass. Nightbear went to meet him, standing on the rock wall, exposed. The lieutenant read from a paper, his voice high and nervous. "By order of the Governor of Oregon and the United States Army, you are to lay down all weapons. You are to surrender, unconditionally. The women and children will be escorted to the reservation. The warriors will be taken to Fort Klamath for judgment." "There is no judgment," Blue Jacket called from a higher rock. "Only hanging." Nightbear looked at the officer. "Go back," he said, his voice calm. "Tell your captain no." The lieutenant, his face pale, turned his horse and fled. The silence that followed was the worst part. It stretched for an hour. Then, a whistle, a puff of white smoke from the cannon line, a high, screaming sound. The world exploded. The first shell hit the cliff wall, 100 feet from the main pass. It was a ranging shot. The second shell was closer. The third hit the stone breastwork at the entrance. The rock shattered. Black, razor-sharp splinters flew like shrapnel. Then, the blue line of soldiers, their bayonets fixed, began to advance. They ran, cheering, into the narrow pass. They thought it was a simple charge. They were wrong. Blue Jacket let them come. He let them fill the narrow, winding canyon. He let them get 50 yards past the entrance until they were trapped. A solid mass of blue uniforms. Now! Blue Jacket's voice roared. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Modoc opened fire, not from the front, but from above, from the sides, from crevices in the rock that the soldiers had not even seen. Every warrior had 5 rifles, preloaded, lying beside him. They fired, dropped the rifle, picked up the next. It was a constant, rolling thunder. The soldiers screamed. They had no cover. They could not see their enemy. They fired blindly at the rocks, their bullets whining and ricocheting. Men fell. They broke. They tried to retreat, but the men behind them were still pushing forward. It was chaos. It was over in 20 minutes. The blue line was gone, broken, fleeing back to their own lines, leaving behind a carpet of dead and wounded. From the fortress, a wild, high cry of victory went up. The Blue Jackets' warriors were ecstatic. They had won. They had beaten the army. Not a single Modoc warrior had been killed. 3 were wounded, not by bullets, by splinters of rock, sent flying by the cannons. Rachel was in the deep cave, the place they called the nursery. She was with Tallgrass Woman, Sunbird, and the children. The sound of the cannons was a dull, terrifying thunder that shook the dust from the ceiling. The sound of the rifles was a sharp, echoing crackle. She spent the battle holding a small, trembling girl, Willow Song's niece, whose name was Little Rabbit. Rachel held the child's head against her chest, humming a tune she did not even remember, trying to block out the screams. This was not a game. This was not politics. When the wounded were brought in, reality hit her. It was not glorious. A young warrior, one of Blue Jacket's loudest, was carried in. He was not bleeding. He was gasping. A piece of rock shrapnel, no bigger than her thumb, had been driven into his chest by a cannon blast. He was coughing up blood. Tallgrass Woman was pragmatic. She looked at him and then looked away. There was nothing to be done. Rachel knelt beside him, horrified. He was a boy, maybe 16. He looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise and terror. She took his hand. She did not know what else to do. She held his hand, wiping the bloody froth from his lips with a piece of her own dress, until he stopped gasping, and his eyes went wide and empty. War was not a concept. It was the smell of blood and fear, and the terrible, rattling sound of a boy drowning in his own lungs. The victory cry outside sounded, to her ears, like a howl. The army was quiet for 2 days. They licked their wounds. They continued to shell the rocks, but they did not advance. The siege was tight. On the 3rd day, a new messenger came. Not a soldier, a Modoc. He was an old man, one Rachel had not seen. He was from Yanax. He came walking, carrying a white flag, and he was weeping. The council gathered, but this time, the mood was not triumphant. I was terrified. They took them. The old man choked, falling to his knees before Gray Cloud. Last night, the soldiers came to the reservation. They rounded up everyone. Who? Nightbear said, his voice flat. Everyone. The man wept. The old, the sick, the ones who did not follow you. Sunbird's mother, 2 of Tallgrass Woman's sons, 23. They are at the fort, in a pen. Like animals. Tallgrass Woman made a sound, a low, keening moan, and crumpled. The captain, the old man said. He gave me this. He said, if you do not surrender, if all of you do not walk out, with no guns by tomorrow, by the sun they will execute them. All 23. This was the real weapon, not the cannons. The camp fell into a new, more terrible chaos. It was not a debate. It was a wound. Blue Jacket was the first to speak. His face was a mask of cold, terrible logic. He has done it, Blue Jacket said. The white man. He has found the only way to beat us. He will make us kill our own. We cannot, Gray Cloud began. We must, Blue Jacket said, his voice cutting. Do you not see it is a trap? It is the same trap. If we walk out, we all die. The army will not keep their word. They will hang the warriors, and they will send the women to Yanax and the hostages. They will die of sickness on the way. They will die anyway. They are our blood, a woman shrieked. My wife was my blood, Blue Jacket roared, silencing her. My son was my blood. I know this math. It is terrible, but it is the only math we have. We sacrifice the 23 to save the 200. We fight, we win, or we all die. But we do not surrender. No! Nightbear's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the cavern. No, he said, stepping forward. That is not math. That is murder. That is the white man's, logic. That is not ours. They are not numbers. They are tall grass woman's sons. They are Sunbird's mother. I will not trade innocent blood. I am not Captain Brevard. Then you are a fool, Blue Jacket snarled. You are soft. Your heart is soft. This woman has made you soft. He pointed at Rachel. You are not a chief. You are not Modoc. You are a husband to a white snake. He drew his knife. A long, glittering blade. Nightbear drew him. I am the chief, Nightbear said, his voice a low, lethal growl. And we will not sacrifice our people. Then you will die first. Blue Jacket lunged. The camp exploded. The 17 warriors who followed Blue Jacket drew their own knives, moving to stand with him. The others, the elders, the men who followed Nightbear, scrambled for their own weapons. The war was over. The civil war was about to begin. Stop! Rachel's voice, a high, terrified scream, cut through the chaos. They froze, both men, knives in hand, inches from each other's throats. Every eye in the cavern turned to her. The white woman, the witch, the snake. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand, but she walked into the open space between the two men. He is right, she said, her voice trembling. She looked at the Blue Jacket. It is a trap. If you surrender, they will kill you. They will lie. They will kill the hostages anyway. They will win. Blue Jacket stared at her, confused. And he is right, she said, turning to Nightbear, whose face was a mask of thunder. You cannot become them. You cannot sacrifice your own just to win. That is not a victory. That is just a different way to lose. There is no other path, Blue Jacket spat. Yes, Rachel said. There is a third path. She took a deep breath. You cannot send a warrior. They will see it as a surrender. And you cannot send a victim. They will see it as weakness. She looked from Blue Jacket to Nightbear to Gray Cloud. You will send me. The silence in the cave was absolute. They do not know what I am, she said, her voice finding a strength she did not know she possessed. They think I am a captive. They think they are rescuing me. They do not know that I have been writing, Gray Cloud whispered. Every day, Rachel said. I have kept a journal. Since the day I arrived, I have written everything. The marriage contract, the words of Judge Hemlock, the peace of this camp, the food you share, the attack, the cannons. I have written the truth. She looked at Nightbear. I gave it to a packer at the fort days ago. A man I paid. I told him to take it to the newspapers in San Francisco. I told him if war started, if I did not come back, he was to send it. She was lying. She had a journal, but she had not sent it. Not yet, but they did not know that, and the army did not know that. I will walk out, she said, with a white flag. They will not shoot me. I am the white bride. I am their story. And I will tell them. I will tell Captain Brevard that I have a journal. And it has been sent. And if they harm one hostage, if they break their word, the truth will be in every newspaper in America. Not their lies. The truth, that they are murderers. And they are holding a white woman who does not want to be rescued. It was a gamble. A terrible, desperate, insane gamble. Blue Jacket stared at her, his mouth open. The knife was still in his hand, but it was lowered. Nightbear was looking at her as if he had never seen her before. They will kill you, he whispered. They might, Rachel said, her voice shaking. But what else will you kill each other? Will you let tall grass women's sons be shot? This is the only path. This is the paper path. I will use my whiteness as a weapon." The council was over. They had their answer. The camp was silent that night. It was not the silence of sleep. It was the silence of a held breath. Rachel sat in her small lodge, her hands numb. She was going at dawn. The flap moved. He came in, Night Bear. He did not bring a light. He just filled the space. He sat, not on her furs, but on the cold, stone floor. He sat for a long time, just breathing. "This is my fault," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "No," she said. "This is not your fault. This is their fault." "I made you a bridge," he said. He looked up, and his face, in the faint moonlight from the smoke hole, was a map of pure agony. I did not know they would try to burn it. With you on it. I am not burnt yet," she said, her voice small. "You should not go," he said. "It is too much. I should have fought him. Blue Jacket, I should die. As a warrior. That is simpler." "No," she said, and she moved. She crawled from her furs and sat on the floor, in front of him. "No, you said it. You have to live. You have to lead. They need you. Not another dead warrior. They need a chief." They were close, too close. The air between them was thick, full of all the things the night in the canyon, the touch of his hand, the shared breath. "I am afraid," she whispered. Not to him, just to the dark. "I am so afraid. Not dying, but of failing, of them not listening, of them just laughing." "They will listen," he said, his voice rough. "Your fire is hotter than their cannons." He looked at her, and the mask was gone. The chief was gone. The warrior was gone. There was only a man who had lost everything. Twice. "I have sent men to die," he said, his voice choking. "I have lost everyone. My wife, my son. But this is the hardest." "What is," she whispered, "sending you?" He said. He reached out, his hand shaking, and he touched her face, the same way he had that night. "My wife." The word was real. It was not a contract. It was a fact. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. "Night Bear," she whispered. It was not a choice. It was gravity. He did not pull her. He did not have to. She moved into him. The embrace was not gentle. It was desperate. It was a collision. He was holding on to her as if she was the only piece of solid land in a world that was flooding. His arms were iron, crushing her, holding her. She clung to him, her hands in his long hair, her face buried in his neck. She was breathing him in the smell of sage and smoke. And him. He pulled back, just enough to see her face. His eyes, in the dark, were burning. If I do not come back," she started, her voice breaking. "Shh," he whispered, and he kissed her. It was not a first kiss. It was only a kiss. It was a kiss off of everything, of fear and desperation, and a respect so deep it ached. It was a kiss of desire, a desire that had been burning under the rock, under the politics, under the war, for weeks. It was a kiss that said, "I see you," it said. "You are my fire." It said, "I am terrified of losing you." It was deep. I was hungry. It was, in its own way, a surrender. His hands were in her hair, and her hands were on his chest, and his heart was not steady. It was thundering, a wild, desperate drum, beating against her palms. The kiss went on, deepening, as if they could somehow breathe each other in, and live. When it finally broke, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. "Stay," he whispered, his voice a raw plea. "Live. Come back to me." "I will," she vowed. "I will come back." He held her, just held her. In the darkness, the cannons, and the soldiers, and the hostages were outside. In here, there was only this terrible, beautiful, impossible thing. The sun at dawn was a thin, gray line of light, cutting the dark. In the cavern, the camp was silent. It was not a silence of sleep, but of held breath. Rachel watched as tall grass woman, her face a mask of grief, sat braiding 2 strands of grass, her fingers moving, braiding her own 2 sons' hair. They were not there. They were at the fort. Hostages. She was braiding the air. Rachel had not slept. She had sat, her back to the cold stone, the small, heavy knife Nightbear had given her resting in her lap. The memory of the night, of his kiss, of his desperation, was a living fire inside her. It was not fear she felt, not entirely. It was a cold, terrible purpose. Nightbear stood at the mouth of the cavern, his back to her. He did not say goodbye. He did not have to. He had said everything. "Come back to me." "It is time," she said. She stood. She wore a buckskin dress. Her hair was brushed, but loose, falling down her back. In her hand, she held a long, dry stick. Tied to the top was a piece of her old white petticoat, the last tattered remnant of her Jacksonville life. She walked out of the cavern, alone. The walk through the winding pass was the longest of her life. Every step was a choice, every shadow. She imagined, held a rifle. When she emerged from the black rock, the sun hit her. A blinding, flat light. The army lines were 200 yards away, a sea of blue, of wagons, of tents, and the cannons, black and silent, aimed at her. A voice, high and panicked, yelled from the breastworks, "Hold your fire! Hold, it is the woman, the white woman!" She did not stop. She just kept walking, 1 foot in front of the other, the white flag held high, until she was 50 yards from them. The line of soldiers parted. A man walked out, his steps heavy. It was Captain James Brevard. He was not wearing his hat. His face was gray with stubble, and his eyes were red. He walked toward her, not as a captain, but as a man walking to his own execution. He stopped, 10 feet from her. He looked at her, at the buckskin dress, at the blue beads at her neck, at the calm in her eyes. "Miss Colton," he whispered, and his voice was a raw croak. "Rachel, thank God. You are alive." He looked, she thought, like a man staring at his own conscience. "I am not alive, Captain," Rachel said, her voice clear and carrying in the morning air. "I am home, and you are the ones who have come to kill me." "No," he said, shaking his head. "We are here to rescue you." "Rescue me," she said, and a cold laugh, one she did not recognize, came from her. "Like you rescued the 23 old people from Yoinax, like you rescued Tall Grass Woman's 2 sons. Brevard flinched, as if she had struck him. "Take me," Rachel said, "to your command tent. I will speak to you, and I will speak to Mr. Stiles now." The command tent was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and fear. Edmund Stiles was on his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. He was not wearing his suit coat. His polished shoes were caked in dust. "This," he sputtered, "is a trick, a desperate, savage trick." "It is not a trick, Mr. Stiles," Rachel said. She stood in the center of the tent. She was not a prisoner. She was an ambassador. "It is an offer. Offer," he spat. "We do not take offers from hostiles. Mr. Stiles," Captain Brevard said, his voice pleading. "The girl she is—" "The girl," Rachel interrupted, her voice cutting through his, "has a name, and she has seen everything, and you, gentlemen, have made a terrible, terrible mistake." "We made a mistake," Stiles laughed, a high, ugly sound. "We have you. We have 23 hostages. We hold all the cards." "You hold nothing," Rachel said, her voice dropping, and the tent suddenly became very quiet. "You took old women. You took sick men. You took 2 boys. You do not hold cards, Mr. Stiles. You hold a crime. You call yourselves soldiers, but you are just thieves. You are cowards, pointing guns at unarmed grandmothers." Brevard sat down, heavily, as if his legs could no longer hold him. Stiles's face was white. "You are a captive, Miss Colton. You have been bewitched, brainwashed. You are not well. We will, of course, detain you. For your own safety, we will protect you." He smiled, a wolf's smile. He was threatening her. He was going to hold her hostage. 2. Will you? Rachel asked. She felt calm. The fear was gone. She felt the fire. And what will you do when the newspapers start to print my story? Stiles's smile faltered. What story? What nonsense are you talking about? My story, Rachel said. She took a step closer to the table. My journal. Journal, Brevard whispered. Yes, Rachel said. A journal. I have kept it every single day since I was sold by Judge Hemlock for $300. I wrote it all down, the contract, the name of Sunbird's baby, the one who died at Yinax. I wrote about the battle, how your soldiers charged into a trap, and how my people fought. And I wrote about you. She pointed a finger at Stiles. I wrote about the hostages. I wrote their names, all 23. Stiles was staring at her, his arrogance gone, replaced by a new, cold fear. And the best part, Mr. Stiles, Rachel said, her voice a low, triumphant whisper, is that I already sent it days ago. When we were here for the parley, I gave it to a packer, a man who owed me a favor. I gave him my mother's locket, and I told him, take this to San Francisco, to the newspapers, and if I do not return, if war starts, you publish it. She let the lie, the beautiful, terrible, necessary lie, hang in the air. So you see, gentlemen, she said, you have a choice. You can keep me, you can protect me, and I will become a martyr, a white woman held by the United States Army, while my journal tells the truth about your war. Or you can execute those 23 innocent people, and you can become murderers, in print, across the entire nation. Either way, I have already won. Captain Brevard put his head in his hands. Stiles was a politician. He was not a warrior. He understood. He was ruined. A white woman. A journal. A scandal his career was over. What? Stiles said, his voice a dry rasp. What do you want? The victory was so sudden, so total, that Rachel almost stumbled. I want, she said, thinking of Nightbear. I want a truce, a real one, not a lie. A truce, Brevard said, looking up, his eyes full of a desperate hope. Yes, we can do that. A truce, Rachel said. For 14 days. A ceasefire. No cannons. No shooting. Your men stay here. My people stay there. And in that time, you will let me speak. To the man in charge. I am in charge. Stiles sputtered. No, Rachel said. You are not. You are just a clerk. I want to speak to Governor Grover. In Jacksonville. Face to face. This was a gamble. Stiles and Brevard looked at each other. They were trapped. They could not attack. They could not retreat. But if they sent her to the governor, it became his problem. Yes, Stiles said, his eyes narrow, calculating. Yes, that is a good idea. A sound idea. The governor must be consulted. We will grant a 14-day truce, Brevard said, standing up, his voice regaining a shred of authority. In exchange for this meeting, I will send an escort to take you to Jacksonville immediately. The journey to Jacksonville was a strange dream. Rachel was in a military ambulance wagon, a courtesy for the white woman. She was guarded, not by brutes, but by a young, rain-soaked lieutenant named Marsh. He was kind. He was ashamed. They rode for hours, the wheels of the wagon grinding in the mud. I do not understand this, he said, not looking at her. He was just talking. I signed on to build forts, to protect settlers. Not this war, he said, his voice low. It is not righteous. We attacked them. They just fought back. And now the hostages. I have to stand guard over old women. I feel dirty. He looked at her, his young, honest face full of misery. And you, miss, he said, you are not a captive. I can see it. You are freer than I am. Rachel looked at him. He was one of the people in Portland, the ones she had gambled on. Your name is Lieutenant Marsh? She asked. Yes, ma'am, he said. Then you are not dirty. Lieutenant, she said, you are just trapped, like all of us. When she arrived in Jacksonville, she was a specter. The town, which she had fled in terror, was just a dusty street. She was different. Lieutenant Marsh escorted her to the main government building, a new 2-story structure. It was the most elegant building in town. It smelled of fresh paint and money. She walked in. Her buckskin dress was dark with road dirt. Her hair was matted. She was an alien. They were waiting for her. In a large, polished room, Governor Grover sat at the head of a long table. He was a large, fleshy man. He had a thick, gold watch chain. Beside him were other men. Men in fine suits. Men with cold, appraising eyes. Lawyers. And the railroad lobbyists. "Miss Colton," Governor Grover said, his voice a deep, smooth rumble. "We are deeply distressed by your ordeal." "I'm not here about my ordeal, sir," Rachel said. She stood at the foot of the table. "I'm here for my people." The lobbyists looked amused. "Your people, miss," one of them said, a thin man with a predatory smile. "We are here to discuss progress, the future, the railroad. It is manifest destiny. It is the will of God. You cannot stop a river from flowing to the sea, Miss Colton," Governor Grover said, his tone paternal, condescending. "And this railroad is that river. It is progress. For everyone. It will lift all boats. It will drown the Modoc," Rachel said, her voice clear and cold. The room went silent. "They will not go to Yanax," Rachel said. "It is a death camp. They will not surrender. You have seen what happens when you attack them. So you are left with a choice." She stepped forward, placing her dirty hands on the polished table. "You can have your river," she said. "Or you can have a war, a long, bloody, expensive war. A war that my journal will make very, very public." Grover's eyes narrowed. He knew about the journal. That was why she was here. "What is your proposal, miss?" a lawyer asked, his voice sharp. "My husband?" Rachel said, and the word felt solid in her mouth. "He will not give up his home. The lava beds, they are theirs. The caves, the water, they will keep that land." "Impossible," the railroad man said. "But," Rachel continued, ignoring him, "the land to the west, the flat land, the land you need for your tracks. He does not need that land. He will cede it, for payment, $8,000, in gold and recognition." "Recognition?" Grover asked. "Recognition," Rachel said, "as a sovereign tribal nation, under federal supervision, not yours. Governor, federal, a treaty, a real one, not a lie." The room was full of sputtering, of outrage. "This is madness. They are savages." Grover held up a hand. He was a politician. He was not looking at Rachel. He was looking at the railroad lobbyist. He was weighing the cost. A war versus $8,000. A scandal in the press. The churches back east were screaming about Indian rights. The political risk. He was trapped. "Miss Colton," he said, his voice tight. "This is highly irregular. It is complicated. It is very simple." "Governor," Rachel said. She felt no fear. Only that fire. "You have one last choice to make." She looked him straight in the eye. "A year from now, 10 years, when this is all in the history books, how do you want to be remembered, as the man who built a railroad, or as the man who signed the order to exterminate an entire people?" Grover's face was pale. She had him. He could not be the butcher, not in public. He looked at his lawyers, at the lobbyists. "This is not," he said, his voice strained, "a matter we can silently solve. This is complex." He looked back at Rachel. The paternal tone was gone. He was speaking to an equal. "I cannot promise you a victory. Miss Colton, the railroad is very powerful." "I'm not asking for a promise," she said. "I'm asking for a proposal, a real one. I will try," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I will send a formal proposal, based on your terms, to the fort, within the week. I will genuinely try." Rachel nodded. Once, she did not say thank you. She just turned her back on all of them, on their polished world, and she walked out of the building. She had done it. She had fought their war, not with cannons, but with words. And for now, the guns were silent. The journey back to Fort Klamath was not a retreat. It was a transfer. Lieutenant Marsh, the young, conflicted soldier, treated her not as a prisoner, but as a dangerous and confusing diplomat. She was given a tent, a small, clean canvas room inside the palisade, and told to wait. The fort was a different place. The aggressive, forward-moving energy was gone, replaced by a sullen, weary tension. The 14-day truce was a new kind of hell for the soldiers. They were not allowed to fight, and they were not allowed to leave. They could only sit, clean their rifles, and stare at the black, jagged line of the lava beds in the distance, a place that had, in their minds, become a fortress of devils, and Rachel was the devil they had invited inside. She did not wait idly. The first morning, she smelled the sickness. The fort's hospital was a long, low building, and the air from it was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, carbolic, and something sweeter, the smell of rot. She went to it. A hospital steward, his apron stained, tried to block her. "Ma'am, you cannot—" "I am here to help," Rachel said, her voice quiet but firm. The army doctor, a man named Harris, was a gaunt, exhausted man with shadows under his eyes so deep they looked like bruises. He had been working for 36 hours, sawing, stitching, and swearing. He looked at her, this strange woman in a buckskin dress, and he was too tired to argue. "Can you hold a man down without screaming?" he asked, his voice a raw rasp. "Yes," Rachel said. "Then get an apron," he grunted. She entered the world of the men who had come to kill her husband. It was a room of 20 beds, all full. These were the men from the first assault. The man's blue jacket had broken. They were not the proud, blue-coated soldiers she had seen in the line. They were boys. Boys from Ohio, from New York, from farms in Missouri. They were crying for their mothers. They were delirious with fever. One boy, his leg a mass of black, swollen flesh, looked at her as she brought him water. "Angel," he whispered, his eyes wide and glassy. "Am I in heaven?" "No," Rachel said, lifting his head so he could drink. "You are in Oregon." She worked. She changed bandages. She washed bodies. She held the hands of men as Dr. Harris performed his quick, brutal amputations. She learned to move with the pain, to not hear the screams. The soldiers, the ones who were conscious, looked at her with a kind of holy terror. She was the Modoc wife, the white squaw, a creature of myth, but she brought them water. She spoke to them in a soft, American voice. She did not, as they had been told, try to scalp them. She was just a woman. She was there, her hands bloody, when Captain Brevard found her on the third day. "Miss Colton," he said, his voice quiet. He looked older. "The telegraph. It has arrived." Rachel put down the basin of red water. She untied her apron. Her heart was not racing. It was a heavy, dull weight. She followed him out into the sunlight. They stood by the telegraph hut. The young operator, his face pale, was holding the flimsy piece of paper. Brevard took it. He read it, his face unreadable. He read it again. Then he let out a long, slow breath. A breath he looked like he had been holding since the day he was born. He looked at Rachel, and his eyes were not the eyes of a captain. They were the eyes of a man who had been pardoned. "He agreed," Brevard whispered. "All of it?" Rachel asked, her voice hollow. "All of the framework," he said, his voice gaining strength. "He calls it a pragmatic solution. The 1,200 acres in the lava beds, yours. The $8,000 in gold for the western lands. The railroad can have their path." He looked at the paper again, as if he could not believe it. "And federal recognition, a sovereign tribal nation, a marshal to be stationed. Not the army, a civil marshal." It was done. She had won. "In exchange," Brevard said, his voice firming, the captain returning, "for a permanent cessation. All hostilities end. All settlers are guaranteed safe passage. And all prisoners—" "The hostages," Rachel said. "The hostages will be released immediately, upon signature." He held the paper out to her. We will draft the formal proposal, he said. I will send a messenger to your husband under a white flag. Today, Nightbear stood on the high rock at the entrance to the pass, watching the single soldier approach. The soldier carried a white flag and a leather satchel. Nightbear took the satchel. He did not offer the man water. He did not speak. He just took it. He opened it in the main cavern. He pulled out the sheaf of papers, the official, elegant, white man's paper, covered in their looping, sharp script. He read it. Tall grass woman, gray cloud. They watched his face. They had expected joy, a cry of victory, cheers. Nightbear did not cheer. He sat down, heavily, on the stone floor. He held the papers in his hand, and he looked old. He had won. He had saved his people, but he had accepted. He had accepted a cage, a 1,200-acre cage. He had traded the entire world, the world of his ancestors, for a small, safe patch of rock. It was the heaviest burden of his life. It was a victory, and it was defeated. It was peaceful. Rachel's return to the camp was quiet. Captain Brevard had released her, and she had walked alone from the fort. When she walked into the cavern, the camp was silent. She was not the girl who had been brought in chains. She was not the woman who had walked out in terror. She was something else. Willowsong saw her first. She cried out, a sound of pure joy, and ran to her, embracing her, weeping into her shoulder. Tall grass woman followed, her ancient face cracking into a smile. She grabbed Rachel's hands and held them. You are here, she whispered. The bridge, it holds, but not everyone was smiling. From the shadows of the far caves, Blue Jacket emerged, he and his 17 warriors. He looked at Rachel. He looked at the joy. He looked at Nightbear, who was standing holding the papers, his face a mask. Blue Jacket's face was a mask of pure, cold contempt. She had not come back as a hero. She had come back to the woman who brought the white man's paper, the woman who brought the surrender. The final council was the largest they had ever had. Every man, woman, and child was there. It was a vote for survival. Nightbear stood. He did not read the paper with pride. He read it like a sentence. 1,200 acres, he said, his voice echoing in the stone cavern. Ours, the caves, the water, but only that, no more. $8,000, he said. For the land we lose, money, and a treaty, recognition. We will be a nation, under their federal law. He sat down. The cavern erupted. The old people, like gray cloud, wept, openly. They wept for the land they had lost, but they wept with relief that the dying was over. The women, Sunbird, the others, they pulled their children close. They saw safety. They saw a winter without cannons. But the young men, the warriors, they were shaking with rage. This is not peace, one yelled. This is offense. The Blue Jacket stood. He let the noise die down. When he spoke, his voice was cold and sharp as obsidian. He is right, he said. It is offense. You are not voting for peace. You are voting for a cage, a zoo, a place where white men can come and stare at the tame Modocs. He looked at the papers in Nightbear's hand. That is not a treaty, he spat. That is surrender. Wrapped in paper. It is the death of our spirit. A slow death. I would rather have the fast one. The clean one. He looked around the cavern. I say no. I say we fight. We fight until the last one of us is dead. We show them what it costs to kill us. We die like warriors, not like cattle in a pen. A cheer went up from his 17 men. The cavern was split. It was war or it was peace. Nightbear stood up. He looked tired. He looked at the Blue Jacket. My cousin, he said, his voice a low rumble. You speak well of death, but you do not speak of life. You want a glorious end. I want a difficult beginning. He looked at the faces of the tribe. There is no clean victory here. There is no win. There is only a choice. He pointed to the children huddled by their mothers. We are not choosing for us. We are choosing for them. We are choosing if our grandchildren will know the name Modoc, if they will speak our language. or if they will just be dust. In an unmarked grave, I choose language. I chose a name. He looked at Gray Cloud. The old man stood, his hands shaking. He looked at Nightbear. He looked at the Blue Jacket. I have buried enough of my sons, he whispered. He raised a thin hand. I vote for the paper, for the children. One by one, the hands went up. Sunbird, the other women, the older warriors. Then the count was taken. 23, Gray Cloud announced, his voice breaking. 23 for the paper. And 17, Blue F Jacket said, his voice dead. 17 for honor. The cavern was split, 23 to 17. It was a victory that felt like a broken bone. The Blue Jacket stood up. He looked at his 17 men. They stood with him. He looked at Nightbear. Not with anger, but with a kind of terrible, sad pity. Then you must live on your island, he said. You must enjoy your 8,000 pieces of silver. You have bought your peace. He turned to his men. We will not live in a pen. The war is not over. It is just over here. We go north. We will find people who still know how to fight. We will not forget you. But we will not be you. He walked out. He did not look back. And his 17 warriors. They walked with him. The cavern was suddenly half empty. The tribe was broken. Rachel watched them go, her heart a cold stone. This was the price. Nightbear did not watch them. He walked to the table, where the army messenger sat, his face pale and terrified. He took the pen the messenger offered. He looked at the paper. He could not write his name. He was a chief, not a clerk. He touched the tip of the pen to the ink, and he made his mark. A simple, crossed line. The messenger looked at Rachel. And the witness? Rachel stepped forward. She took the pen from Nightbear's hand. His fingers were steady. She looked at the paper, the lawful white wife, the bridge. She dipped the pen, and beside his mark, she signed her name, Rachel Colton. It was done. Outside, the truce was holding. The cannons were silent. Peace had come, but it was a cold, quiet, broken kind of peace. 6 months passed. The snows came, a deep, silencing white that covered the lava beds, making the black rock look like a sleeping giant under a clean sheet. The truce was held. The cannons at the fort were covered in canvas, and the soldiers huddled, defeated not by war, but by winter. And then the snow melted. The spring that came to the lava beds was not a soft, green thing. It was a fierce, wet, determined life. Water streamed from the black rock, and in the patches of earth that the Modoc had hauled in baskets, the first impossible blades of green corn pushed their way toward the sun. The lava beds looked different. The change was not in the rock, which was eternal, but in the life that clung to it. The Thule lodges, once so temporary, were gone. In their place, small, sturdy wooden houses were built, tucked into the rock, their walls thick against the wind. The smell of wood smoke was still there, but now it was mixed with the scent of freshly sawn pine and the damp, rich smell of turned earth. At the edge of the pass, where the army had once aimed its guns, a new building stood. It was a single square wooden office. A sign, painted in neat black letters, read United States Marshal. A man in a simple coat sat on the porch, his boots up, watching. He was not a soldier. He was a man of civil law. A few federal troops, wearing a different, cleaner blue, patrolled the perimeter. This was not a war zone. It was a border, a fragile, negotiated, and precious line. The loudest sound in the camp was no longer the echo of rifles. It was the sound of children. They ran, shouting, between the new houses, their bare feet tough against the stone. They still played their games, but the shouts were a new, strange mix. They would yell in the quick, fluid music of the Modoc language, and then, in the next breath, huddle around a piece of slate and sound out the new, awkward shapes of English. In the mornings, Rachel was their teacher. She had not gone to Portland, but a schoolhouse had come to her. It was in the shade of the great cavern, a place that had once been a fortress. and was now a classroom. She taught them their letters. She taught them the words that had, for her, been a weapon. She taught them the words contract and law and rights. And in the afternoons, she sat with tall grass woman, and she learned. She learned the Modoc words for river and hope and corn. She learned how to weave the tulle reeds into mats that were cool in the summer and warm in the winter. The language was not dying. It was not being replaced. It was growing. It was bending. It was, in this small, protected patch of rock, surviving. She was, in all ways, his wife. The paper, the one she had signed as Rachel Colton, the one that had been a bill of sale and a treaty, was gone. It had been burned in the first fire of their new wooden home. Its purpose was served. Her name was Rachel, or as Tallgrass Woman and the other women had begun to call her, in a name that held both respect and a touch of awe, the woman who speaks. She and Nightbear lived in the largest of the new houses, the one set by the spring. The evenings were not for war councils. They were for life. "The corn is too high," Nightbear observed one evening. They sat by their own fire. His hands were not on a rifle. They were mending a strap of leather. "It will dry the stream by August." "Then we must dig a deeper well," Rachel replied. Her own hands were busy, mending one of his shirts. Her palms were no longer the raw, blistered hands of a new worker. They were calloused, strong, and capable. "Or we must plant less, and ask the marshal for more grain." "The marshal," Nightbear said, the word still sounding strange on his tongue. He looked at her. "Gray Cloud will go to Portland next month. He will speak to the federal agent. The $8,000 was not enough. We need seed. We need cattle. You should go," Rachel said, looking up from her needle. "Gray Cloud is old. You speak their language. You should show them. Show them the chief, not just a messenger." He looked at her, his face soft in the firelight. A small smile touched his lips. "I am here," he said. "This is my land. I do not like Portland." She smiled back. "Then Gray Cloud it is, but he will take a letter from me. A letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. The real story. This time." "Good," Nightbear said. "A story of corn, not cannons." This was their life. It was a life of small, practical, difficult things. It was a life of peace. But the peace was not whole. It was a broken thing. Many of the new houses were empty. The caves that had once sheltered 17 families were empty. The great cavern, once so full of voices, now had space, and the space ached. The blue jacket was gone. Sometimes, a packer would bring news from the north, rumors, a wild band of Modoc, fighting, raiding, and being hunted. They heard of skirmishes near the Columbia River. They heard of soldiers killed. They heard of Blue Jacket. He was a ghost, a legend, a warning. When this news came, Nightbear would grow quiet. He would walk to the edge of the pass, to the high wall of rock, and he would stand for hours. Looking north, he had chosen language. His cousin had chosen honor. He had chosen a difficult beginning. His cousin had chosen a glorious end. And the wound between them, the wound that had split the tribe, would never, ever heal. One afternoon in the late summer, a civilian wagon pulled up to the marshal's station. It was not an army wagon. A man and a woman got out. Rachel, who had been washing clothes by the stream, stood up, wiping her wet hands on her apron. She recognized the man. It was James Brevard, but he was different. He was not in uniform. He wore a simple farmer's coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He looked smaller and older. The woman beside him was Margaret. She looked happier. They met Rachel in the center of the camp. The Modoc children, curious, gathered at a distance, staring. "Mr. Brevard," Rachel said, nodding. "Just James," he said, and his voice was humble. "I am retired, from the army. We have a farm, near the Dalles." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes taking in everything. She saw the corn. She saw the children with their slates. She saw Willow Song, laughing as she hung laundry on a line. She saw life. "He wanted to see," Margaret said, her voice soft. "He had to see. that it was real. She took Rachel's hands. She looked at them, at the calluses, at the strength. "We heard rumors," she said. "In Jacksonville, they said you had gone savage." Rachel smiled, a small, sad smile. "Do I look savage, Margaret?" "No," Margaret said, and her eyes shone with sudden tears. "You look strong." She looked around the camp, at the black, towering rock, at the small, determined patches of green. "It is not a perfect world, Rachel," she said. "It is a bad world, full of bad men and bad choices." She glanced at her husband, who was standing awkwardly, watching the children. "But perhaps this is the best we could have. The best in a bad world." They left an hour later, promising to send seed. That evening, Rachel and Nightbear stood on the high rim of the cavern, the same place she had stood, her first day, and saw the camp. The sun was setting. The black rock of the lava beds was not black. It was on fire. It was painted in shades of red and purple and deep, aching gold. The wind was gentle. He was quiet for a long time, watching the color fade. "Do you?" he asked, his voice low, not looking at her. "Do you regret that you were brought here?" That day, at 18, Rachel looked out at the land, her home, her prison, her victory. She thought of Silas, of his weak, treacherous face. She thought of Judge Hemlock and his dry, paper voice. "I regret," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I regret the way. I regret the betrayal. I regret the law that made me a thing. I will always regret that part." She turned to him. She reached out, and in a gesture that was now as natural as breathing, as simple as her own heartbeat, she took his hand, his fingers, calloused and strong, closed around hers. "But if I do not regret the life that came after," she said. "If I do not regret this rock. If I do not regret these people. And if I do not regret you." He held her hand. He did not speak, he just held it. They stood, side by side, watching the last sliver of sun disappear, leaving the world in a soft, purple twilight. They talked, their voices low, about the new schoolhouse, the one they would build of wood. They talked about the letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, the real one, the one that would tell the truth. Not the lie she had been forced to tell, but the truth of the vote and the peace. As they turned to walk back to their home, the first stars appeared. They passed a small lodge. In the doorway, a little girl sat, playing with a doll made of corn husks. It was Little Rabbit, the child Rachel had held during the battle, and in the girl's dark, shining hair, holding it back from her face, was a glint of silver. It was the pearl hairpin, her mother's pin, the one she had given to Nightbear at the ceremony. She had learned much later, kept it. He carried it with him every day. And the night before she walked out with the white flag, as he held her, he had pressed it back into her hand. Come back. She had kept it, a symbol of his vow. And 2 weeks ago, on the little girl's birthday, she had given it to her. "Her name is not Little Rabbit anymore," Rachel whispered to Nightbear. "I know," he said. They had, together, renamed her. Her new Modoc name, translated to English, means hope. Rachel looked at the child. She looked at the new houses tucked into the ancient rock. She looked at the marshal's station, a single point of law. She looked at the empty caves of the ones who had left. It was not perfect. It was not a happy ending. Not in the way the stories were told. It was the beginning. It was broken. It was small. It was real. The bridge still stands. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from. Please comment below, share your thoughts, and let us connect. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to our channel, Wild West Tales, like this video, and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.